Chapter 743 Ray's Send-Off. How time flies. Ray smiled to himself as he stood by himself, facing a crowd of elves that had escorted him to the very edge of their community. He had wanted to take a small walk on his last day here, and it seemed everyone was somehow made aware of that. The young ones, elders, and esteemed elders all gathered in his presence and took the walk with him until he got to the community's boundary. Then, looking at all of them now, he couldn't help but smile. The past few days have been a mixed bag. It's been fun learning even more about the elves and exploring their land a little, but it's also been. Ray set his eyes on one of the two people that stood in front of the crowd. It was Esm. Awkward. They hadn't really spoken ever since she told him she needed space from him, and he didn't think they were going to say anything before he departed. They often relayed communication through eye signals, or by using Kara, who was currently right beside Esm as an intermediary. Kara and Esm will be staying behind to continue the work I started here. They'll also be overseeing the exploration and exploitation process in the land. That meant, despite the three of them arriving in the community together, only he would be returning. Ray reckoned he might have to bring in more workers at a later time, but he couldn't just bring strangers into Elven land, especially when they had just gotten used to Kara and Esm. For now, we'll use golems and elementals for the tasks, while Esm and Kara will manage. Ray, of course, would do his best to remain in the loop of things. So the whole thing was supposed to go smoothly. And in the case of another dragon invasion, I'll be sure to look out for any signs. Having done all he could on his part, making all the preparations necessary for his absence, Ray reckoned he had nothing left to do in the elf community. In fact, that had been the case for over a day now. Yet, he had intentionally delayed up until this moment for two major reasons. The most obvious one was that he was hoping to somehow make up with Esm before he left. But since he decided not to push too hard out of consideration for her feelings, the efforts at reconciliation had to come from her. And it didn't seem like she planned to do that anytime soon. Then, as for the second reason, I'm nervous, no, scared, about seeing Alicia. I don't even know what to say when I see her. His thoughts were slightly convoluted regarding her case. Alicia had found out in the worst possible way that Ray was Relix, and that he was secretly strong. Afterward, she fell into a coma, unable to properly process all of that information. Unlike the others, who had enough time to digest everything while I was in a coma, this is like the opposite. And that was what frightened Ray the most. It was why he had hung around the elf community for so long, even after he was supposed to have returned home by all logic. However, since there was only so much escapism he could employ, Ray was finally able to deal with his feelings and sort out his thoughts. He was now ready to face whatever waited for him in the capital. Once again, I'm grateful for the send-off. Ray spoke to the crowd of cheering elves, who cheered even louder once he spoke. He no longer needed to use his scent to command obedience. The mere fact that he saved them and ended the war that would have caused their destruction, at least, according to them, meant he was already a savior in their eyes. His allies Esm and Kara were also viewed similarly, though with less reverence than Ray himself. Despite being a half-elf, there was no discrimination against her any longer. When Ray asked about the reason for their sudden change in treatment towards Esm, still suspecting that they were only being nice to her because he was still around, he got a single response. The oracle has touched her. She is pure. Ray remembered the oracle indeed touching her, so perhaps that changed something about Esm. However, for all he could see, she looked the same. Her status window also labeled her as a half-elf, so there was no real difference. Still, the fact that Esm was now accepted by her people made him glad. Even though she can no longer be the oracle and help them from above, she can still help them right here. And that was most likely enough for her. With Esm now slowly integrating herself into elven culture, and the progression of their plans for the eastern continent underway, Ray once again thought this was the perfect time to depart. I gained a lot of things, but I also lost quite a few as well. It left a bitter taste in his mouth. But he received consolation by telling himself that the mission was never meant to be straightforward. Hence, he had to take his victories with his losses. Bwoosh! A sparkling portal opened up behind Ray, with distortions affecting the space around him. Farewell, Sir Ray. We'll miss you. Come back soon. Cheers and words echoed in the air like chants, and it warmed Ray's heart the moment he was about to depart. Then, Master Yaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaa causing everyone in the bustling crowd to fall silent almost instantly. Wait for me, Master. The voice was loud, but it was difficult to discern its location. Was it coming from the left? Right? Behind? Forward? No. None of those things. The echoes that permeated throughout the community had only one point of origin. Master. Above. Landing right in front of the slightly stunned Ray was the symbiote slime, Emil. Her soft, round body bounced with finesse as soon as she scored the landing, and she jumped to Ray's face the moment she appeared before him. Having wide open eyes with tears streaming out of them and a bright smile on her face. Chapter 744 Emil's Comeback. A moment of silence existed between Master Correction, former master and the renegade familiar. The tension in the air was palpable, and even though Emil leaped to Ray's head, she was bounced back by a resistance she would not leap through, sending her crashing back to the ground that she now bounced on. The expressions on the faces of Ray and Emil were like night and day. While Emil had an optimistic vibe around her, a sincere expression of love and devotion, Ray's face darkened almost instantly. He gave her a cold glare and didn't even move from his position. Mast. What are you doing here? Was the first thing that proceeded from Ray's lips the moment he couldn't handle the silence anymore. There were several things he wanted to tell her, many of which were a lot harsher than the question, but his calm mind allowed him to still be reasonable. Why is Master being so mean to me? I just... Stop calling me that. Don't you have a new master already? Why don't you go and meet Adrian? For a moment, Emil had a blank expression on her face. It seemed like she was confused by Ray's attitude towards her, which further confused Ray. He had already resolved within himself to kill Emil when next he saw her, since she was too dangerous to be allowed to live, but her current behavior was throwing him off. He felt too conflicted to even properly respond to her strange behavior. He also couldn't rely on the audience to judge the matter for him, since none of them knew about what happened between him and Emil. They appeared just as lost as he was, so the entire area was just a stadium of silence. This did not last for long, though. Why is Master being so mean to me? I've always been on your side, Master. Ray found that very doubtful, considering how she sucked all of his mana and nearly killed him and Esm. Now that he thought about it, Emil must have known that he would survive, so maybe she was targeting Esm from the start. Either way, she betrayed him in the worst possible way and went to Adrian's side. Why am I even still talking to her? She could still be working for Adrian at this point, and all of this could be some kind of trap. Ray would have granted more credence to the suspicion of his if Emil wasn't behaving so stupidly. None of her actions had any logical ground, and Adrian definitely didn't operate in such a way. Besides, her status window showed that she wasn't bonded with anyone. Of course, all of this could still be some ploy by Adrian using her immature mind to throw me off and lower my guard. To what end, though? "You're so mean, master," Emile cried out, breaking Ray from his inner thoughts. "Why are you still suspecting me, even after everything? I never betrayed you." "Then what do you call what you did with Adrian?" "It's a secret." Ray raised his eyebrows at this point, growing slightly more impatient with Emile. "A secret? Why yes. I heard you like surprises, so. Ta-da. What the hell are you talking about, Emil?" Ray felt he was nearing his limits, but the system quickly corrected his emotions, so he returned to his calm self. Emile, on the other hand, was fidgeting rather nervously. "I'm not sure I'm supposed to tell you, but I think it should be fine, right? After all, this is all for the benefit of Master." "Just speak." "Oh okay. All of it was just an act, Master. Honestly. I had to act like that so Adrian would believe I was on his side, just as I had to feign interest in him this whole time. It was all so that I could get close enough to him." "To what end?" Ray asked with a deeper frown. "This. Glop." Right before Ray's eyes, Emile transformed into a perfect version of Adrian. "The conditions for using makes it so that I have to be in physical contact with the target for an extended period of time. I had to find a way to do that, so that meant temporarily bonding with him until the conditions were satisfied and I could use the skill on him." Ray was already shell-shocked from seeing Emile transformed into Adrian, but after hearing her explanation, he became even more amazed, no, impressed. He already knew what did, and it wasn't just restricted to replicating the outward appearance of the target. "Why, you have access to all his skills," Ray muttered, his eyes widening as he stared at Emile. "Yup. And no way. She's actually telling the truth." Ray could see Emile's status window, and everything was perfectly the same as Adrian's status window. Except, of course, but Ray already knew that wouldn't be carried over. Still, every single ability he has is at Emile's disposal, and if I copy all of them, then I will also have the same abilities. This was a massive harvest for him, far more than he expected. "See, Master. I worked so hard to get these skills for you, and you treated me so coldly." Emile whined, returning to her slime form in an instant. "You were going to leave without me too. Do you even care about me, Master?" "Oh, of course I care about you," Ray had to mutter as he stared at Emile with newfound affection. All the negative thoughts he had about her vanished into thin air the instant he saw the list of skills he could have for himself. Really? Yes, really. I was just so hurt that you left me. I thought you didn't love me anymore. And no way. I didn't mean to hurt you, Master." "I'm sorry, Master." Emile bounced forward, crying out of her created eyes, and Ray opened his arms wide open. He also had his own thoughts as he drew closer to her, beads of tears forming in his eyes. "Emile. You are a genius." The two of them hugged, happy to be reunited once again. Chapter 745 Conflict on Trust. "But why it feels so good to finally feel your touch again, Master." The warmness of Emile's voice, and the jiggly feeling her slimy body had as it rubbed against him made Ray laugh. He couldn't deny that it felt good to have her optimistic voice echo in his ears, the same voice he considered annoying in the past. Somehow, losing the symbiote slime made him realize just how much he cherished her. It feels good here, too. He gave an honest reply to Emil's words, causing her to giggle loudly. He felt her body rub off against him even more, and he let her have her fun. He didn't even care that this was happening in front of an entire population of elves. The current Ray would do anything to spoil Emil for her accomplishments. I definitely won't hold back on appreciating her this time. He. Master loves Emil. Well, there were things Ray thought he would have to clarify, but for the most part, he felt things were still within control. As long as his slime didn't have any strange ideas, he didn't really mind whatever she said. Master and Emil are going to have a... Okay, slow down. Ray swiftly raised his voice, feeling within his gut that this was the right time to cut Emil off from whatever she was about to say. I have some idea about what she was about to say, and... yeah. Too far. He instinctively stole a glance at Esme, not really knowing why, and he found that her gaze was not on him. Something about that made his heart sink, but also relieved. What's wrong, Master? I really need to teach you about filters. He found himself whispering rather viciously at the slime. That's not the only thing I want you to teach me, Master. He. Stop. Just. Stop. Ray was slowly being reminded of the obnoxious side of his familiar, causing all the nostalgia to evaporate rather quickly. Ah, yes. Emil has always been this kind of person. His thoughts trailed, but he still strained a smile regardless of the slight frustration coiling within him. She was childish, immature, very suggestive, and incredibly clingy, not to talk of her tactlessness and a bunch of other qualities that Ray could remember off the top of his head. How did you even manage to fool Adrian? He mumbled to himself, nearly out of disbelief. It was strange to think someone like Emil came up with that strategy. Ader was actually the one who proposed the idea to me. Huh. As soon as Ray heard this, his strained smile froze in place, and his playful mood vanished. His eyes remained wide open and he stared keenly into Emil's eyes. What did you just say? Well. He told me to keep it as a surprise for you, but... when you were asleep that one time, he told me of a plan that he thought would make you very happy. Ray's fingers rubbed against his chin as the image of Ader appeared in his thoughts. He could definitely see him pulling off something like that. It worked, didn't it? You were very excited to see the surprise, right? Even though he clearly heard the question, Ray didn't reply immediately. Instead, his thoughts remained fixated on Ader. He really went behind my back to plan something this intricate. I can understand the end goal, but... now that I think of it, this entire thing with the elves has all been a part of his plan. Meeting Adrian, meeting the Oracle, and a whole host of issues, it all stemmed from Ader guiding Ray to the elves and working certain things behind the scenes. He also hid important information from me, and I still don't know the extent of his knowledge since I didn't restrict his activities. I'm also not with him very often, so I have no clue what he does a majority of the time. In the past, Ray wouldn't bother thinking too much about it, but... the Oracle's words. It has to be about Ader. He narrowed his eyes, parting his lips as he resumed his bright smile towards Emil. Of course, Emil. I am excited. Yai. If Ader could use Emil, his own familiar, to perform a task that he wasn't even aware of, Ray was slowly beginning to worry about just how deep his influence was. The worry grew into slight hints of fear. None of these would be a problem if I was certain that Ader was on my side. And for the longest time, I thought he was. Ray thought to himself. He always knew the absolute beast was evil by nature. Ader didn't even try to hide his malevolent side, so there was never an issue with it. As long as Ray could control him, and he was completely loyal, there would be no problem. But was that truly the case? Is he only professing loyalty due to some grander scheme? The Oracle told me to be wary of him, and so does the system. There has to be a good reason for that. Unfortunately for Ray, this wasn't the time or place to think such thoughts. Even if I think deeply about it, I don't know what I'm supposed to do to stop him. He's very useful, and I really could use him as an ally. He's also not shown any real animosity towards me, and he's always acted in my interests. The secrets and half-truths ultimately benefited Ray, so could he really complain? Should I trust the Oracle's words over Ader? Or should I trust Ader? What if his goals are simply parallel to mine, at least for now, so he is only on my side because it benefits him? The moment that ceases to be the case, then Ray could feel paranoia beginning to creep in, and he didn't like the feeling. In the end, I think there's only one way to solve this problem, and that is to use my new skill. He heaved a sigh. The one he got from the Oracle, and the best tool he had on his side at the moment. Chapter 746 Departure from the Elves. Ray saw the system window displayed before him as Emil's gooey body slipped back into him and re-established their bond. Once again, he felt the unreal sensation that he experienced when they first bonded. A rush of power swelled throughout his body, and he felt beyond alive. It was nearly orgasmic, but Ray controlled himself from leaking out any of his feelings through his face. Hence, despite having a stoic expression on his face, he felt immeasurable pleasure internally. Before he could even acclaim it, though. "I've missed your body so much, Master. It looks like your body has missed me too. You've grown stronger too, haven't you? Ah. This feels amazing." Emil's voice pounded within his head. He didn't complain, though. Instead, he simply smiled and sighed. "No thanks to you. You drained all of my mana, so how exactly was I supposed to fight back against that explosion you sent to me? I had to spend my preserved stat points," he murmured, slowly remembering the feeling of anger he had previously. Now that he thought of it, Emil actually needed some talking to. Or would that go to Ader? He wasn't sure who to blame, but he needed to still educate the former about what was acceptable or not. Just for future purposes. "Why didn't you use, though? Didn't you copy it? Me leaving you didn't mean you couldn't use it. I actually thought that was what you'd do, though it would have taken you time to absorb the energy, which would provide me and that guy a chance to escape." For a moment, Ray froze. It seemed, perhaps even more than Emil and Ader, he also needed some talking to. "I was overwhelmed and confused at the time. That's why I didn't think to use it." "I understand, Master. Honestly, I'm glad my departure shook you that much. I guess you really do care about me." "I do, Emil," Ray said with a smile. No, only because she was a very useful familiar to have, and also not because of her recent accomplishment with Adrian. It went a step further than that. We've spent so long together hearing each other's thoughts. To me, Emil is like another part of me. A neighbor closest to me than anything else. She can also be pretty endearing and cute, not that I'm going to tell her any of that. Master, I can hear your thoughts, you know. Ah, shit. Ray's thoughts echoed as his eyes popped wide open. Ha 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 ha. So you think I'm cute, Master? You also think I'm a part of you? Kiki kiki. He 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 he. Ha 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 ha. Don't push it, Emil. I, master. Despite the conversation ending that way, Ray could sense that Emil was happy with him, and about herself. That made him glad for using a trick on her. Of course, I know you can hear my thoughts, Emil. But only the thoughts I want you to hear. He smiled, thinking on a deeper level than what his familiar had access to. Thanks to his layered thoughts, Ray could not only multitask, but he could segment his thoughts into various regions and fool anyone reading his mind. I meant all those things about Emil, but I played it in a way that will make her think I didn't want her to know my true feelings. After what he recently experienced, he realized he needed to appreciate Emil more. This was the first step towards that goal. Indirectly praising Emil will make her understand how I feel about her, without her constantly seeking validation and praise from me. Ray concluded. Perhaps this was a scummy way to go about it, but he didn't think of it that way. It was the same way siblings didn't need to constantly repeat that they cared about their fellow siblings, since said affection could be gleaned from their actions and indirect interactions. I might not have many opportunities to show how much I value her, and Emil can get very needy at times, so this is the perfect compromise. Once he concluded thoughts on that front, he decided to address the other issue: Adrian's skills. With those skills, I'll be able to get considerably more powerful, and Emil will also be a powerhouse on her own. She'll be useful in a lot more ways too. He thought to himself, acknowledging how things just got a whole lot better for him. Still, this isn't enough. The words of the oracle still weighed on him. Only he knew what was about to come: the destruction of everyone and everything in this world. Compared to the heights I need to achieve to prevent the destruction of everyone I care about, of the people of H-Tray, I need to be even stronger. This time, the power he sought wasn't only for himself, but for the people around him. Money, business, and his own individual might didn't matter if there were no more hardly any living beings left in the world. In a way, protecting everyone was beneficial to him. But he wasn't doing this only because of that. After interacting with the elves for long enough, Ray was able to confirm his feelings and fully accept his newfound perspective. I can understand you a lot more now, Adonis. He wanted to help more people. I have started with the elves, but now I want to go even further. He reopened the portal that had closed up the moment he saw Emil. Whoosh. In H-Tray, there were also dwarves, giants, and fairies, none of which he had ever interacted with, or even seen. That changes soon. Farewell, everyone. Ray waved at the elves, who had now resumed their cheers once they saw he was leaving for real this time. He stole a small glance at Esme, and found her smiling at him. She nodded slowly and whispered some words to him. This was the first time she would interact with him for some days, and he felt his heart skip a beat once he saw her lips move. His mind interpreted what she meant instantly. Thank you. He repeated her words, nodding back before moving closer to the portal. He entered the swirling gate, but not before swiftly whispering a response. You're welcome. Chapter 747: Spectacular Welcome. HAAA. As the cool wind flapped against his face, and the surrounding scent entered his nostrils and filled his lungs, Ray found himself smiling as he looked down on the city that was underneath him. It's good to be back. Here he was back in the capital, completely enamored by the city he had lived in for most of the time he lived in H-Tray. The modern landscape was far different from that of the elves, and the mere ambience reminded him the most of home. Yes, even though the capital of the United Human Alliance was medieval in more ways than one, it still had hints of advanced civilization that made Ray leak out a smile once again. He missed this place. Everything seems to be the same. Ray mumbled, even looking at the area where Ader had supposedly had a bit of a skirmish. Looks like he fixed it before I came. I told him I'd do it, and yet. Ha. Ader was too much of a perfectionist when it came to serving Ray, which made it difficult for the latter not to rely on him, or even doubt his true intentions. Still, Ray had already decided on what to do with him, at least for the time being. I just have to be more measured in my instructions, making sure he doesn't do anything behind my back this time. I should also put him under constant surveillance. Ray stopped his dreary thoughts, since it was ruining the refreshed mood he was in. Right now, I shouldn't be thinking about Ader, or anything of the sort. There was only one thing that was supposed to occupy his mind, and as he stared at the royal estate, the name of that person kept flashing in his head. I've been putting it away for days, but it's time. It's time I saw Alicia. He took a deep breath, preparing his heart. He made sure to regulate his heartbeat and also his expression to the point where nothing he felt would be removed by the system. Sure, his emotions would be dulled in his current state, but at least they wouldn't vanish. I can't afford for them to. Once Ray was sure that he was ready, he instantly cast spatial magic that caused him to instantly vanish from his position. Whoosh! And appear within her resting quarters, all within the blink of an eye. AAHH. The moment he entered the room, he laid his crimson eye on the wide-awake Alicia. She was currently seated upright on her bed, her eyes staring longingly at the world beyond the window beside her. The winds caused her long brown hair to dance in the air, and the sparks that flew thanks to his teleportation added a glowing ambience to the room. Even as she sat, just staring out into the world, Alicia looked magnificent. Ray felt an instant lump in his throat as he kept his gaze on her, unable to look away. Even though his feelings were dulled, he could still feel the loud thumping of his heart. He could still feel his body growing hot. Everything was in small measures, but Ray could feel his emotions intensify and swell even beyond his expectations. Ali. Before he could complete his gentle whisper, she slowly turned her head in his direction. At that moment, time stopped. Everything seemed to fade into obscurity, and the details that Ray constantly perceived turned blurry. The only object of focus was Alicia White, and that wonderful, wonderful smile that only she could give. Her ember eyes seemed to sparkle, and her face brightened the moment she laid eyes on Ray, causing him to feel an even bigger spike in his heart, almost close to the danger level that he was so wary about. He would have tightly clutched his chest if he wasn't so paralyzed by her gaze. As she looks. She is. Throughout the course of his adventure in the land of the elves, Ray had seen so many pretty women. In fact, pretty much all of the elves were more beautiful than Alicia. Then, there were cases like Faralia, Ciela, and the Oracle, who were too beautiful to properly put into words. Even then, none of them compared to the kind of beauty that Alicia had. It could have been due to bias, but there was something about her as a person, the gentle way she looked at Ray, and the warmth of her presence that made her beauty extraordinary and unfathomable. That was what he thought as he smiled back at her. Absolutely stunning. Ray. You're back. Her voice was just as he remembered it to be. It was sweet and melodious, the epitome of peak femininity. Since she usually spent time in the library, Alicia adopted a quieter voice than most people he knew, and that made her unique in that regard. Yeah. I'm back. Those were the only words he could muster as he looked at her. Come closer, Ray. You're not just going to stand there, are you? As she said this, Ray's thoughts began to get clouded by the negative emotions he had suppressed. Fear, sorrow, pain, and guilt especially ran amok in his heart. Still, he moved forward. I'm sorry. I can't. I know you can't properly express your emotions, Ray. I completely understand, so just keep coming. There was something about the way Alicia said his name that made him soft like jelly. The kind way she looked at him was almost divine. I don't deserve this, he thought to himself. Before he knew it, he stood right in front of her, mere inches from the place where she sat on the bed. Why don't you sit? Ray could not respond to the question, but he didn't sit either. He just kept staring at Alicia. Ader was the one who informed me of your condition, and I've already spoken to our classmates too. They brought me up to speed on the current issues. I could also hear everything that happened around me while I was unconscious, Ray. His eyes twitched as soon as she said all of these things. That means. I understand, Ray. Everything that happened. Everything you did. I understand everything. Chapter 748 Youthful Exuberance. Tears. In abundance, they fell from Ray's eyes as he heard those words from Alicia. His eyes were wide open, encapsulating both shock and relief, leaving a gateway open for the bitter tears to flow. Ray's knees felt weak, and before he knew it, he fell to his knees. I'm sorry for not telling you all this time. All of my reasons sound like excuses to me at the moment, and I know. I know I was supposed to say something, especially after you went and told me so much about you. Not only did he passively deceive her, but he actively even lied to her. And the result? Everything that happened to you. The tragedy that day. It happened because of me. If I wasn't so obsessed with trying to lead a double life, then everything would have played out completely differently. Ray's emotions were reaching the point of system interference, so he had to stop. He took a breather, settled his heart, and continued this time with a much lower voice. If I had been there that day, I could have. Yet Alicia, I'm so sorry. It was strange for Ray, who had so much power and authority, especially where he was coming from, to grovel at the feet of someone far weaker. Any elf who saw this would probably faint in disbelief. But this was exactly how he saw Alicia. She was much better than him in every department except for strength. I just got lucky, but she's been an amazing person from the start. He admired her and loved her at the same time, feelings that he intended to convey at this moment. Alicia. I actually. For the longest time, I've. Ray, you shouldn't blame yourself for what happened to me, to everyone. Alicia cut him off right as he was about to confess. He didn't want his words overlapping hers, so he instantly stopped. Her warm hands reached out to him, touching his cheeks softly from both ends as she smiled with such kindness. Please stand up, Ray. Come sit beside me. Ray obeyed that very moment, his legs still trembling as he did so. His eyes remained fixated on her as he gave her a look of disbelief. Why are you still so kind to me? Even after everything you. He couldn't conclude his words due to the influx of emotions, so he let his expression convey the rest. Alicia got the message instantly and only smiled sweeter. Because it's not your fault, Ray. Once she said this, though, her expression became a lot darker, and the smile she had turned into a mild scowl. It wasn't directed at him, though. It's this world that is the problem, she muttered, her eyes trailing off as something burned deep within them. This world. I know you love this world, Ray. You have a lot you want to do here, and I completely understood. I want you to be happy, but I'm sick of it. All the glamour and sweetness from Alicia was completely gone, and she expressed sheer exhaustion if not disgust towards Ray. Alicia. Ray felt bad, but he decided to keep listening. All the pain, fright, and all the other negative emotions I have come to associate with this world have overwhelmed the both of us. Don't you see that, Ray? I know this isn't the right place or time to say all of this, but honestly, I'm just tired. When Ray first entered the room, the sight of Alicia staring out the windows told him she was simply admiring the world outside, but he now knew that his initial thought was wrong. Alicia wasn't looking out at Ray. She was daydreaming about the world she had lost by coming here. I've had more than enough time to think about it, and honestly, Ray, I want to go back. Ray understood perfectly. She had mentioned this in passing many times, but this was the very first time Alicia was saying it with such a strong expression on her face. The resolve was nearly overpowering, even for someone like Ray. I understand, were the only words his lips mustered as soon as she told him this. There was no way he could tell her his true feelings now. There's no point if she wants to leave. If I try to make her stay, it will just be like with Esme all over again. Ray was done trying to make others conform to what he desired, all in order to make him happy. That was incredibly selfish, no matter how he looked at it. I want you to be happy, Alicia. And that means I have no right to get in the way of your departure, if that's what you really want. This time, the tears completely dried up, and he reached out for her cheeks, holding them in his palm the same way she held his. I'm actually working on something that could potentially get everyone home well, for those who are interested in going back. There were many problems with Ray, and that could be enough to drive some people back home, but Ray wasn't going to ditch this world. He reckoned there had to be a few others like him who felt the same way. Really? Alicia's eyes instantly brightened the moment she heard the news. What is it? The stuff you're working on. Haha. Despite laughing about it, Ray didn't feel good about the topic in the slightest. After all, it had to do with Alicia leaving, and also Adrian's plan, both of which weren't the most savory things to think about. Still, he remained positive through it all. Well, that's a surprise, Alicia. Boo. Are you keeping secrets from me, mister? You just apologized for one, and here you are committing the same crime again. This one is different, madam. It's supposed to be a pleasant experience for you. Like a birthday present, you know. That's right. My birthday. Ha ha ha. We tend to lose track of all that stuff in this world, don't we? Exactly. Another reason why I should go back to Earth. Alicia said with such mock determination that the next course of action was inevitable. Ha 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 ha. Both teenagers laughed as they hugged each other, each feeling the bittersweet emotions associated with their reunion. There was a lot that could be said right then, but the two chose to laugh and be happy about everything. It had been too long, and they missed each other. I've really missed you, Alicia. As Ray closed his eyes, thinking such sweet thoughts, he couldn't have expected the next question that would echo in the air. By the way, who is Esme? Yet. Slowly detaching from their embrace, Ray found Alicia smiling rather dangerously at him. Yes, Ray. I heard everything. Well, I. Come on, Ray. Just tell me. I want to know who this new friend of yours is. Unable to help himself, he blushed rather hard and tried to get away from Alicia, but she dragged him back, still laughing as she pressed hard on the question. While all of this was happening, a certain individual was watching from behind the entrance to Alicia's room through the slit between the double door, for that matter. Ha! I can't interrupt now, can I? His voice echoed softly as he took in the sight of youthful exuberance. His crimson eyes glowed and his red hair swayed as he gave a wide grin. Without wasting any more time, he left the door and began walking down the hallway, adjusting his tie while wearing his usual evil smile. Besides, I have a rather important business to attend to. Chapter 749 Black in White. Deep within the Forbidden Valley, the territory of the White Dragon Lord, there existed a mighty castle. In all senses of the word, it resembled an elaborate mansion, with a luxurious compound. White fog covered the entire space, marking the valley as the territory of the White Dragon Lord of the Empire. Any who dared venture in without an invitation would instantly be noticed by the Lord, and snuffed out before they could take another step. Within the domain of a lord, they reigned supreme. However, this particular lord did not seem to be supreme in any sense of the word. Deep within her mansion, in her incredibly vast sleeping quarters, she sat on her incredible bed, one that resembled the amalgamation of many king-sized mattresses. Even if she was in her dragon form, the lord would not be able to cover the entire space that her soft bed offered. The walls surrounding her were painted white, with hues of blue decorating the surroundings. Her curtains were also pure, with embroidery that had light blue hue, and the same applied to pretty much every luxurious design in the room. Even the chandeliers followed the same format, and they reflected gloriously on the pure white floors. Her carpet matched the sheets she used to cover her bed, and all of them blended perfectly to form a chamber worthy of a lord. Despite being surrounded by all of this wealth and power, however, the lord remained hunched as she sat, covering her face with her two palms. Hic. Hic. Loud sobs escaped her lips as she sat there, desolate and utterly in pain. Her body trembled, and gasps escaped her gaping mouth at intervals. Even when tears had long dried up from her eyes, she still continued to drown in self-pity and the writhing pain within her right eye. I really lost so much in a single day. Her disjointed thoughts trailed as she immersed herself in the most sorry state imaginable, at least for a dragon lord. I lost my precious subordinates, friends, and my eye. All because of my hubris. She was done blaming the incompetence of everyone around her. After mulling over what happened for so long, she could see how everything was her fault. It all stemmed from her idea, the audacity she had in seeking out a loophole to defy the emperor's orders. Never again. Never again. She had now learned her lesson, but at what cost? She had lost too much now. Her face was forever scarred, and her perfect body was now incomplete. She was bound to be shunned by the rest of her colleagues during the upcoming meeting, and it was possible that rumors of her misdeeds even spread to the academy. Would her precious students turn against her? Would the staff there look at her the same way? Freyja had no idea in the slightest. Her reputation and absolute standing as an exemplary dragon lord had been ruined. Would it have been better to? She suddenly stopped, not only because of the fear that accompanied her thought on death, but because she heard something. Something outside. Who's there? She muttered, her sobbing stopping instantly as she straightened her posture and looked at the massive door in front of her. Nothing responded. The White Lord stared in confusion. Freyja was sure that she picked up a certain sound like the kind of noise someone made when they were shuffling around. Since she had exceptional senses, even the slightest movement would set her off. See, could it be him? Has he come back to finish the job? The image of the great old dragon lord appeared in her frightened mind as she found herself trembling. As she thought this, certain whispers began to dance in her ears, almost like a smoldered conversation that she couldn't quite pick up. The whispers grew louder, and then suddenly ceased. What's happening? Who's there? The great old lord wouldn't resort to such a sneaky way, which meant the person in her premises was not him. If that's the case, then. Freyja gritted her teeth and clenched her fist, rising up from her bed at once. Anyone other than the great old lord and the emperor who entered her premises were intruders. The mere fact that said intruder was shuffling around and whispering meant they did not deserve a shred of her courtesy. If they got past the fog without detection, then they must be pretty impressive. Freyja thought to herself, but she still marched forward anyway. Perhaps the fear and pain instilled to her by the great old lord made her immune to the cautious thoughts that would have caused more hesitation. In a flash, she reached the door and even opened it wide open. Nothing. There was nothing there. What? What's going on? She proceeded outside, first poking her head out and then her whole body. Before she realized it, she was in the passageway, looking at one side, but finding nothing there. For some strange reason, it was dark despite the lights usually being perpetually active. Only the light from her room bled into the passageway, bathing her in showers of white, while everything else was pitch black. Darkness was inconsequential to Freyja, though. She could still see perfectly fine. Nothing here. Then, after hearing another sudden whisper to her left, she swiftly turned and looked at the other side of the passageway. There, seated on the ground, was a black cat. It had completely black fur, with glowing red eyes that were fixed completely on her. What? The creature's appearance startled her, forcing her to blink with the only eye she had remaining. Once she reopened her eye, the cat was nowhere to be found. What in the world? Was I hallucinating? Perhaps this was a side effect from having only one vision that she didn't know of. It could also be Tra. Freyja. Hearing a familiar voice call her name, Freyja found the whisper coming from right behind her within her bedroom. Ahh. Ahh. Slowly turning her head, as well as the rest of her body, she turned to look at the figure who sat there majestically. Who is that? The strange man sat on her bed, and kneeling on the ground beside him were her two subordinates that she thought were dead. Katarin and Shaya did not look at her, though. Their heads were lowered, and they were completely still. They seemed alive, but something was off about them, something that even Freyja could not decipher. Come in. The man on the bed said with a smile. He had crimson hair, and he donned a completely black suit. Despite being in the premises of a dragon lord, he exhibited even more authority than her. Frankly, he frightened Freyja, so she did as he said. The moment she re-entered her bedroom, taking a few more steps forward, she heard a loud creak, the sound of the doors closing. With a widened eye, she turned to look at the reason why, but what she saw caused it to bulge and turn bloodshot. Her three dead comrades Taturius, Vulcan, and Prothea stood right behind her, blocking the room's entrance and exit. They also had dispassionate expressions on their faces, and their heads were bowed low. All for one person. What's happening here? She didn't need anyone to tell her before realizing that all of this was occurring because of the smiling man on the bed. But why? Who is he? What does he want? As she stared at him with cautious eyes, feeling fear now rising and surging within her body, she took another step forward. Much to her horror, the man grinned even more and parted his lips to speak. My name is Ada. Chapter 750 Resolved to Win. Sit. Before the mighty presence that was before him, Adrian Chase had no choice but to obey. He had been escorted by dragons to this place, the grand office of a lord, so the least he could do was obey the simple instructions given to him by the one he came to see. the one who was thoughtful enough to grant him an audience. You. As Adrian sat on the rather comfortable seat, doing his best to observe his surroundings without taking his attention away from the entity before him, he maintained his smile. The office was splendidly designed, possessing streaks of purple, blue, and black. The carpet was exquisite, and the quality of furniture was unlike anything that could be found in any human or elven settlement. In fact, it was almost reminiscent of Earth. The room had an air conditioning enchanted item, as well as enchanted items for lighting, among other very useful utilities. By all means of comparison, it was not too dissimilar from a modern office. So, how are you enjoying the Empire so far? The man before him asked, his voice deep and his tone smooth. It almost felt like the clap of thunder, though. I just arrived on the continent, sir. I haven't had much time for sightseeing or anything of the sort. Adrian rightly responded, bowing his head politely in order to pay as much respect to the figure as possible. He found that this method usually worked on those in high authority who perceived themselves as greater than those they granted an audience. Just as expected, his actions eased a bit of the tension in the room. Is that so? I understand then. Adrian was yet to take a proper look at the lord before him, but he could see his outfit. He wore a polished black and purple suit, one that spoke of incredible wealth and prestige. Of course, it was enchanted, as was practically every other accessory that the man donned. He had an earring in one ear, a chain, and a few rings, from what Adrian could decipher. Adrian made sure to observe all of this very subtly. I will have to leave very soon, since I have a rather important meeting to attend to. So, raise your head and let's conclude this as quickly as possible. Understood. Adrian lifted his eyes and witnessed the handsome and perfectly crafted face of the Dragon Lord before him, the storm dragon of trembling skies. Now then. Where to begin? Vizel was a rather pragmatic one, a sharp contrast to the regular prideful dragon that existed within the Empire. Even among the lords, he possessed a particularly sharp wit, coupled with an attitude that calculated all actions and outcomes based on utility. How useful or advantageous a position was determined whether or not he would subscribe to it. It was the same reason he decided to grant the human before him an audience despite the more important things he had on his plate. I just got news on the deaths of those three. And I have to soon leave for the meeting that is being held to explain their demise and discuss the other pending matters. Vizel thought to himself as he made a short sigh. He certainly had his own thoughts concerning the deaths of his colleagues, but it wasn't like he didn't see it coming. The other lords also probably had a fair idea what happened as well. At the moment, however, the Storm Dragon Lord chose not to dwell too much on the matter. Instead, he offered his full attention to the human before him. Adrian Chase. When my generals first reported their unanimous decision to take in an exceptional human who sided with them against the elves, I was slightly curious, but didn't give it much thought. But somehow, Adrian had managed to garner even more of his attention over time. In the final fight, even though it ended in failure, he even fought off the hero of the elves. I saw the footages, and I have to say, he's pretty impressive. And all of this was not even accounting for the fact that the boy had necromancy as a skill. He was too interesting to pass up. So, what do you want, Adrian? The Lord finally asked, his eyes burrowing deep into the azure irises of the boy. I would like to be of service to the Empire. To you. If it is possible, I'd like to integrate myself with your society and become one of you. One of us? As a human. Adrian nodded his head, not showing any hesitation to make clear what he wanted. I like that. Vizel grinned to himself. This human showed a lot more backbone than most dragons that he knew. And what exactly can you offer to the Empire that would make us consider you? Adrian smiled the moment he heard the question, a move that made Wiesel even more intrigued by him and excited to hear his response. I did a lot of research before coming here. I know about the true origins of the dragons. As otherworlders not native to his world. Oh. The Lord's eyes widened considerably. But you are not the only ones. The humans have also resorted to using your kind to battle you. By summoning otherworlders. I am an otherworlder, and there are even more like me in the United Human Alliance. For real. Wiesel nearly gasped, incredibly amused by the information he was receiving practically for free. Now it made sense why the humans were suddenly turning the tides in their battle against the dragon armies placed in the western continent. To think they had that kind of secret. How fascinating. However, what was more fascinating was the fact that this human was able to figure out the identity of dragons as well as sell out the trump card that humanity possessed. You were summoned to protect the humans of H-Tray, yet you would betray them? Why? Wiesel asked, licking his lips as he did so. Because I believe the dragons will ultimately win this war. And in that respect, it doesn't matter what side I was summoned to, or what I need to do to achieve the desired result. No matter what, I intend to win. Oh? Fascinating. For a few seconds, silence existed between both otherworlders dragon and human as they were locked in a seemingly ended staring contest. The first to blink was Wiesel, all due to the loud laughter that burst out of his flapping lips. You're quite amusing, you know that. I am glad that I was able to amuse you, sir. Oh, please. It's fine, Adrian. I quite like you already, so there's no need to keep up the formalities. Does that mean I can call you by name? Hey. Don't push it. We're not that close. Wiesel said this with a bit of aversion, but there was no rage in his tone. It was simply a reaction of pride, something present within all dragons, especially among lords. Understood. In any case, I am willing to give you a chance to prove your worth and join the Empire. But first, Adrian, you will have to go through rigorous training and education to properly serve the Empire. I completely understand, sir. You do? You sure? It won't be easy. All your fellow comrades will be dragons, and you will have a long way to go to prove your worth to everyone around you. Wiesel hammered down the point, but none of that seemed to deter the boy. Adrian simply smiled and nodded, parting his lips in sheer resolve. Whatever it takes. Asterisk. 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 Notice, prepare yourselves for the next adventure that will take you all by storm. A/N, I sincerely hope you enjoyed the arc, since most of it was a setup for the upcoming arc and it had less action than the arc before it. Still, I had a lot of fun with the story, and I hope you did too. Chapter 751 Vision of the King. Deep within an ancient forest, a place of unparalleled enchantment lay hidden from the world. Towering trees with luminescent leaves created a canopy that sparkled like 1,000 emerald stars. The air shimmered with the faint glow of the flora around, casting a soft, ethereal light upon the forest floor, which was carpeted in a bed of moss that seemed to pulsate with life. Mystic creatures roamed freely in this secluded paradise, from majestic unicorns, to griffins that flapped their wings in the air. Pegasi danced amongst each other in a flock, and they were accompanied by several other creatures of wonder. At the heart of this magical glade stood a structure that defied the laws of the mundane world. It was a palace woven from the very essence of nature itself. Vines as thick as a man's arm twisted and spiraled upwards, forming columns and archways that glowed with an inner light. The walls were made of interwoven branches and leaves, creating intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as one looked at them. Windows of crystal clear water, held in place by the unseen force of magic, reflected the myriad colors of the surrounding forest. Atop the highest tower, where the vines converged to form a delicate spire, a certain entity darted gracefully through the air. Her wings, delicate and translucent, caught the light and scattered it in a prism of colors. With a joyful laugh that echoed like the tinkling of tiny bells, she flew towards an entrance formed by two intertwining branches. She appeared humanoid, but was small about an inch or two in height, and the way she danced with the wind as she closed in on her destination seemed surreal. Hee hee. In a playful glide, she ventured inside. Inside, the palace was even more breathtaking. The floor was a mosaic of polished gemstones, arranged in a way that depicted the culmination of the beauty that the enchanted forest possessed. Walls of living wood pulsed with a gentle warmth, their surfaces alive with the slow, steady heartbeat of the trees. Hanging from the ceiling, luminous flowers glowed softly, illuminating the space with a warm, golden light. The figure flew through the grand hall, where the air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the sound of a bubbling brook that flowed through the center of the room. Its water as clear as crystal and sparkling with flecks of gold. Before long, she arrived at her destination, the Grand Palace. Within this pristine space, there was enough room to contain the entire population of her people. It had a wonderful warmth to it, with the floors sparkling like fine wine, reflecting the several gems that hung on the ceiling. More entities like her were stationed beside windows that were systematically aligned high above the ground floor of the hall, and they remained suspended in the air even as she arrived inside. They donned golden armor, each having staffs that were wielded more like spears than harmless sticks. The eyes of these sentinels fell on her, but none of that bothered this one. She simply gilded forward, her focus on the altar that stood a few meters from her current position. In no time at all, she closed the gap and knelt at the foot of the elevated platform, the place where the great throne stood. "My king. You called for me." Right in front of the kneeling girl was a figure a couple of inches taller than her, but still having a similar build. He had a completely white apparel, adorned with hints of silver, and a golden crown that floated above his head. Gems decorated his body from head to toe, and even his eyes seemed to be made of crystals. He sat majestically on the grand chair, his massive wings nearly 5 times larger than his entire body. His face seemed to glisten like the sun, and his very presence radiated energy and majesty unlike anything one could see beyond the forest. This was the one who witnessed the beginning and the end of Fairy King. "I have had a vision, Fae." He spoke, his voice almost resembling a rather grave whisper. In contrast to his serious countenance, the one called Fae maintained her bright smile and youthful exuberance. The tension within the palace did not seem to affect her in the slightest, even before her king. "What did you see, my king?" For a moment, the king said nothing. He merely looked at his subject with his gem-like eyes, before finally closing them and speaking with a sigh. "War." The moment he said this, Faye's eyes slightly widened, her countenance swiftly shifting to shock. "War? You say?" As she said those words, her body trembled. "Indeed. It draws near upon us, the time long prophesied from the beginning of days." His tone, his breathing. Everything was calm. But the expression on his face showed something else, a graveness that could not be conveyed through words alone. "Ahh. At long last." Faye's trembling persisted, but her expression of shock transformed into that of delight. The news did not frighten her, neither did it cause her to grieve. Instead, she couldn't be more excited. Her overjoyed face lay bare for all to see. "The promised days are near." "It is too early to rejoice, Faye." The king raised a hand, causing her to instantly cease her commotion and bow her head in understanding and respect. The vision was rather unclear, and I am yet to properly interpret its content. Regardless, I see a great darkness visiting our lands. This darkness once came near, but this time it will enter into the forest. Will the oracle allow such? Faye responded with a confused expression. The oracle's pacifism makes her grow impotent as the centuries pass. She is only concerned with the welfare of her own people, as she should be. None of her priorities extend to us fairies. The king's sighs grew louder. This darkness. Will it consume the elves? No, I did not see that. And what of us? Will it consume our lands? Will it ravage our forests and swallow us into its depths? Despite painting a horrific future with her manner of speech, Faye appeared excited. Her cheeks burned bright red, and she had a perverted expression on her small, cute face. Her gem-like eyes shone brightly, as she tried her best to conceal her squeals. The Fairy King noticed this and slightly shook his head. He understood Faye and her perverted thirst for battle, her never-ending desire to witness and partake in the long-prophesied war. For fairies, guardians of the forest who never perished, this was their purpose. But Faye's obsession with it was on another level. She dreamed of that day every waking moment. For the several millennia since her conception. That is not for you to know. The Fairy King finally answered. TCH. What was that? And nothing, my king. The sentinels couldn't help but groan and frown as they witnessed all of this playing out before them. The sheer recklessness that Faye displayed was unbefitting before their glorious ruler, but none of them could voice a word of complaint. After all, Faye was the strongest. Other than the Fairy King, there was none that stood superior to her or was anywhere close to being her equal. As was the rule of the forest, those who were weaker had to swallow their thoughts and restrict all the displeasures they had to their imaginations. Besides, if they desired to challenge her, Faye was always up to the challenge. Every single sentinel had tried at least once to beat her, but they ended up suffering severe humiliation and punishment that would have killed them if they weren't immortal. In any case, Faye, I have a mission for you. At such a critical juncture? My king. Why me? Because, rather unfortunately, you are the most reliable one among the fairies, the most capable person to fulfill my request. You unfortunately. Faye appeared aghast, but the Fairy King seemed unapologetic about his choice of words. She simply had to swallow the sentiment as it came. The mission requires you to leave the forest. You will head to the land of the elves at a specified period and guide a certain individual here when the time is right. Individual? But no one is allowed into the forest. In fact, the opposite was also true. No one was ever meant to leave the forest, including all of the fairies within its embrace. At least, not until the end of days. This is an exception. As king, I possess the authority to issue that, just as I have authority over the forest and all that dwell therein. No one needed a reminder of that. He was their father, the progenitor of all fairies, and the one who granted them their eternal life from his primeval skill. All fairies, without exception, bowed their heads the moment he uttered those words. Who is this person that I will usher into the forest? What makes them an exception? Faye asked, her tone still that of reverence, but also of undying curiosity. You can tell me that much, right? After pausing for a while, looking at the impatient fairy with his all-seeing eyes, the king finally parted his lips. Chapter 752, Alliance Summit. Now then. Shall we begin the meeting? In a vast hall, surrounded by pristine decorations such as stained glass, marble tiles, exquisite curtains, and crystal-like chandeliers, a certain conference was being held. A large rectangular table stood erect at the center of the hall, with chairs on all sides too, especially at the head of the table, occupied by Vita and Conrad, leaders of the United Human Alliance. On both the right side of the table were the teenagers who had been summoned to save their world, the Otherworlders. Alicia, Belle, Clark, Justin, and Tricia sat comfortably in their pristine chairs. And opposite them were the distinguished members of the Alliance who were considered the strongest, most influential as well within the framework. Luciel, Brutus, and Lucy, who had just recently been promoted to admiral, occupied this position. Then, at the foot of the table was the designated leader of the Otherworlders. He was their representative, in a sense, and he was also recognized as the strongest one in the room. Ray Schuyler. Standing behind him was Ader, his familiar, who still refused to sit despite many attempts to make him do so. He floated above the ground, but his feet were still close to its surface, so it wasn't easy to tell. Still, this was the arrangement of the meeting room. Guards were stationed outside the room, giving everyone inside utmost privacy. The items for discourse were also quite robust, so everyone strapped themselves into their respective seats and awaited the commencement of their grand assembly. The first thing I'd like to say is to offer words of gratitude to our Otherworlder heroes who have continued to support us through everything that we have been through. Even during attacks and betrayals. You six have continued to remain with us. For that, you have my thanks. Conrad spoke, turning to both the 5 teenagers, and then to Ray. He had a genuine smile on his face, one that did its best to explain just how thankful he was. Vita also bowed her head, not saying anything else since Conrad had pretty much taken all the words out of her mouth. The other distinguished individuals of the Alliance followed suit and did the same. It might have been strange for the Otherworlders to receive such treatment from adults who were far older than them, but they were already used to it. And so, as always, they chose to be humble and dismiss the thanks. Ahem. Okay then. Let's move on to the first matter on the list of things to discuss. Conrad cleared his throat, now casting his gaze on Ray. Thanks to the efforts of Ray Schuyler, the elves have agreed to be our allies, supplying us with ores from their end while we offer them enchanted weapons in exchange. They are also fighting the war on their end, so it's important that this alliance will be benefiting both sides. Conrad went further to explain the model they would be using to supply the elves their weapons, and how they would be receiving the goods from them. In the end, it all boiled down to the Reaper Group. The Reaper Group is the largest in the market at the moment, and they are our personal suppliers as well. In essence, the whole exchange will go through them. Their operations will have the full support of the Alliance, and it appears the elves have also agreed to trade with them. No one would have expected that a company that surfaced mere months ago would have such a monopoly on the most profitable and important business in the Alliance. But considering their track record and the quality of their products, it was only common sense to go with them. Besides, with or without the aid of the Alliance, the Reaper Group would have kept advancing anyway. They had already grown so large on their own, which was impressive in its own way. They donated a lot of items to the Royal Council, and they even assisted in rebuilding the city. Certainly, their reach wasn't small and their pockets also ran deep. Most importantly, they were trustworthy. And with that concluded, it's time we discuss the issue of alliance. One of the rather problematic subjects to be addressed today. Now that the nobles of the alliance were dead, there was really nothing standing in the way of the Royal Council making decisions. They also now had more resources at their disposal than ever since they confiscated the resources of the nobles. With the aid of the Reaper Group, and the recent alliance of the elves, it was safe to say that the economic situation of the alliance had never been better. They were thriving, possessing more than enough resources to get them through the coming years. But, even with that issue addressed, there was one matter that could not be ignored. The war against the dragons. It's only a matter of time before they attack us with ferocity. We're doing our best to arm our soldiers with sufficient resources, particularly enchanted items, but there's only so much those can do against the full might of their army. We have suffered many losses over the years, and the number of soldiers we have has dwindled. It was bad to the point where they had to dispatch a lot of palace guards and regular soldiers to the front lines, leaving the cities and capital largely defenseless. That was not a sustainable model, and with the reduction in dragon attacks, the security of the alliance had returned to its optimal capacity. The difference in crime rates, as well as general productivity, made it compelling to leave things that way. But that would mean the front lines would suffer. The dispatched soldiers taken from the regions and cities are cannon fodder anyway. It's best they remain in their local areas and carry out their duties. There's no use sending them to die at the hands of the dragons, Brutus said, almost as soon as Conrad brought them up. I agree. We are at a crucial stage in the alliance right now, which means we need as much security personnel around. Sending them to their deaths is pointless, Luciel added. Where will we get soldiers, then? There aren't many new recruits, and even those we have are not ready for the rigors of war. Lucy sighed. It's a dead end. Their only saving grace was that the dragons were yet to launch a full-scale assault. But that was inevitable. You have us, don't you? We'll be heading to the battlefield in the coming week, so that should take a lot of the burden off your shoulders, Clark commented. Not all his fellow Otherworlders were as enthusiastic as him to rush into the battlefield, but they all nodded in agreement to his words. Their duties remained the same, and since they were finally heading to the battlefield, surely some difference would be made. No offense to you, Sir Clark, but a few soldiers, no matter how skilled and strong, do not win wars. We need an army. Lucy responded with a stern tone, though she still had a respectful vibe about her. While there existed reverence for the Otherworlders, it was no secret that they were inexperienced when it came to actual warfare. For that purpose alone, she felt the strong need to correct his mistaken assumption. There are several attack points that the dragons utilize, and since they have aerial power, it's easy for them to swarm and overtake a group if there are too few members. It's one of the reasons we diverted so much security to the battlefield despite them being weak. Her further elaboration was educational, causing Clark to nod in understanding. Thanks for the enlightenment. He bowed his head. My pleasure. The two smiled at each other with some form of unknown camaraderie, something strange to have since they hardly even knew each other. In any case, concerning the alliance. We tried to reach out to the other civilizations outside the United Human Alliance and offered for them to join hands with us. Vita finally brought the conversation back to the pertinent topic. They still refuse to be a part of the alliance, but most of them have agreed to create a somewhat mutually beneficial agreement. We send resources to their lands, and they offer some of their finest warriors to assist in the battlefield. Can we trust them? This time, it was Luciel who spoke up. I find their actions suspicious. Same here, Lucy added, causing the two women to look at each other, smile, and then nod. Well, we don't have much of a choice, do we? We have to put up with their requests and simply watch them closely to make sure they comply with their end of the deal. Besides, why would they sabotage our efforts to drive away the dragons when they also run the risk of being obliterated by the enemy? No one could argue with that logic, so everyone fell silent regarding the alliance. Everyone but one. If I may speak. There is another alternative that you haven't considered. All looked in the direction of the boy who spoke. His dark hair swayed slightly and his two eyes gleamed with brilliant crimson as he interlocked the fingers of both hands and stared forward, parting his lips to reveal his thoughts. Chapter 753, Alliance Summit. It's only been a few days since I returned from the elves. Ray's thoughts trailed as he sat before the crowd that now looked at him with both surprised and curious eyes. I've had some time to think about this, and I've even consulted with Ader on it. Smiling within himself, he decided to bring the matter to the notice of everyone else in the room. This would be the first time any of them were going to be hearing it, so he had to go into deep detail with them. Thankfully, due to his individual accomplishments, as well as his status as the leader of the Otherworlders, his words had a lot of weight. In fact, it had all of the weight. What do you mean? Regarding the southern continent. Conrad was the first to speak up, his brows raised in sheer curiosity. Surely, you don't mean. Indeed, I do. The dwarves and giants dwell there, as well as a host of monsters, exotic kinds more dangerous than the ones we have here in the West. Ray began, causing the natives of H-Tray to gasp. Most of the Otherworlders didn't fully understand the severity of his proposal, so most of them maintained a neutral stance. The only one among them who appeared stunned by Ray's idea was Alicia, and this was most likely due to the knowledge she gained from reading tons of books in the library. The giants are considered to be the strongest race after the dragons, and the dwarves are the most technologically advanced. Looking at things closely, no matter how skilled the people at the Reaper group are, they will mostly be dealing with much more potent ores and materials than they are used to. It would be beneficial to have the craftsmanship of the dwarves on our side, and as for the manpower necessary for the war, being allies with the giants would help out a lot. All the glaring problems that the Alliance currently faced would be dealt with if they allied themselves with those of the South. But it's not that simple. Vita spoke up, her tone a little shaky. No one could blame her for stuttering in her usually flawless speech. They all understood how dangerous the South was. There's a reason we never considered heading to the South and pitching the idea to them. At least, with the elves, despite their ideology. They spared any human that dared cross their territory. But those people in the South are different. Yeah. They're savages. Especially the giants. You fought one before, didn't you? Luciel turned to Brutus, who just finished speaking, and he nodded. I was much younger back then, and it was back when we ran an expedition to the south after getting our first dragon attack. I lost miserably to that single giant. It was a completely random giant, yet Brutus, who was still regarded as one of the strongest humans back then, could not hold his own against it. If not for the mere fact that they were close to shore, he was sure they would have all been slaughtered there and then. The giants despise water, so that's why despite their violent tendencies they've never invaded other lands and run their own conquest. If not for that mere fact, it would have been game over for everyone before the dragons showed up. Brutus sighed. An alliance with them is a bad idea. Ray narrowed his eyes as he heard this. What about the dwarves? Does that mean they're not allied with the giants, despite the two sides being attacked by the dragons? No. The dwarves and giants despise each other. One prides itself on being a technologically advanced and civilized group, while the other are primitive and violent in nature. Luciel responded, shrugging as she did so. We've only encountered dwarves a few times, when they reached out to us and we traded a little. We got the Truth Seeker technology, as well as the Oculus from them. In exchange, we gave them minerals and ores. Conrad sighed, nodding his head as he spoke up. The trade stopped very long ago, though. Our guess is that the war on their end grew so intense that they could not reach out to us any longer. That, or maybe they found another source for their resource shortage. Ray nodded as he silently assimilated all of this information. So, would you say the dwarves are easier to deal with? No. Not at all. Conrad frowned slightly as he looked at Ray. They are a prideful bunch, and they are also greedy. They look down on us throughout the trade and often determine the value of what they would exchange with us for our minerals. Yeah. We couldn't even refuse due to their anti-magic technology and the other incredible machinations that they had. Honestly. We were a bit thankful when they suddenly stopped showing up after a while. Ray mumbled, taking in all of this information. He had thought about the possibility of his idea being rejected on serious grounds, but he never imagined the situation would be as dire as this. The books in the library had limited information on the dwarves and giants, so he didn't know most of the details that were being poured out to him. Even at that, Ray didn't have any intentions on giving up. Wouldn't you have also discredited an alliance with the elves if I brought it up a week ago? In the end, we don't know enough about these people and their culture to outright deny the possibility of an alliance. He spoke up, determination burning in his eyes. For the giants, they probably saw your expedition as strangers infringing on their native land. And for the dwarves, their treatment of you was terrible, but it would be no different from how you would also treat entities that you deem less intelligent and savage like monsters. Of course, it wasn't Ray's intentions to equate humanity in H-Tray to monsters. All of this was merely to serve a much larger point. We don't have to like each other. There's no reason to fully understand them, just as there's no reason for them to fully understand us. We just require a mutually beneficial relationship that will ensure we all get what we want. Chapter 754, Alliance Summit. Tense silence filled the room. It was clear that the natives of H-Tray heavily disliked Ray's plan, as well as his perspective on the matter at hand. Who could blame them? The experience that humanity had with the denizens of the South were far from pleasant. Besides, they already had a somewhat more preferable alternative in the form of a mutually beneficial alliance with the human nations scattered across the lands. Yes, the might of the giants and the technology of the dwarves would be far more preferable compared to their current options, but the risks associated with that were also worth considering. The Royal Council currently didn't think they could take that chance. If I may offer some kind of compromise. Ader slowly raised his hand, instantly quelling the silence in the hall. All turned to look at his smiling demeanor, causing his grin to broaden further. The eyes they used to look at him were less of skepticism, and more of nervous curiosity. After all, Ader was the one largely responsible for the damage control following the matter with Dagon, and also the restructure of the capital. He was already recognized as a brilliant individual, and it only added more accolades to Ray, since the latter was his master. Hence, Ader's words could not be ignored. Why don't we send a small, elite team to offer an alliance to the giants and dragons, preferably otherworlders? That way, the risk of loss is minimized, and chances of success are higher. Unlike the humans of this world, the otherworlders were incredibly powerful. They were strong enough to fight dragons, the strongest race in all of H-Tray. That meant, of course, they could hold their own against other races, dwarves and giants included. But we need the otherworlders on the battlefield. A few otherworlders is a good investment for a potential army compared to the measly, insufficient soldiers you currently have at your disposal. Besides, I think it's important to hear what the otherworlders have to say regarding the matter. As soon as he said this, Ader turned to the group of teenagers, a warm smile on his face. What do you guys think? I think it's worth the try. Ray was able to convince the elves to join us, right? I trust his idea. Justin was the first to speak up. Following him was Belle. I agree. The remaining otherworlders were a bit slow to agree. But it was clear that they weren't going to outright abandon Ray's idea since they didn't have the first-hand knowledge of the southern natives like the people of H-Tray did. And they were also more affiliated with Ray. There was only one who disagreed. I think all of us should stick together. Splitting us into multiple groups will greatly reduce our potential. Especially considering how we've been training together since we arrived here. Alicia White's dissent took Ray by surprise, but her words were not without merit. But aren't we going to be divided into squads on the battlefield? Where's the teamwork in that? Justin asked with a skeptical tone, but Alicia remained undeterred. I am well aware of that, but I'd argue that there is still going to be a great deal of teamwork, especially relating to the formation that each squad employs. By sticking together, we'll be able to work in greater synergy. But more people will die. Ader's words stopped Alicia in her tracks. All fell silent the moment those chilling words echoed in the air. If we choose to go down this road, more soldiers will needlessly die. Rather than sacrifice our warriors in a battle that is way above their capacity, is it not better to outsource and have others sacrifice themselves in our stead? It sounded cold-hearted, but it was the most strategically sound plan. We have sufficient resources to attract the dwarves, and we have enough strength to convince the giants. Ray's plan holds the most merit, unless you'd prefer the deaths of countless innocents whose demise could be easily prevented. Ader's eyes were narrowed on Alicia as he said those words, causing a bead of sweat to form on her face. Whether it was his intention or not, everyone in the room was reminded of the sheer damage that her divine summon caused in the capital, as well as how many lives were lost as a result of its rampage. In a sense, her recommendation for the otherworlders to stick together was pointing towards the same outcome. That's enough, Ader. Ray's voice echoed out. It was low, but the heaviness it carried caused everything in the room to tremble. He slowly turned his head and glared at Ader, silent rage evident in his eyes. The moment the familiar witnessed this, his body shook tremendously. I apologize. It seems I took my words too far. He mumbled, bowing his head very lowly at Ray, and also at Alicia. You. Just don't do that again, please. Ray took a glance at Alicia, and the troubled expression she had told him that she hadn't stopped recoiling from the consequences of her actions. He knew her plan was to simply take out the Dragon Lord and herself. And the only reason she became so suicidal was because she thought he was dead and wanted to kill herself due to the mental trauma that brought on her. In a way, everything was his fault. Yet Ader had to bring such a topic up as a means to silence her. He sighed, unable to get angrier than he was thanks to his emotion regulation. Still, since his familiar's tactic was effective, there didn't seem to be anyone else who disagreed with the plan. I should take this as a win, right? Yet. Ray felt a bitter taste in his mouth as he watched the participants of the summit look at him for the final verdict. Despite any of their dissatisfactions, it was clear that Ray held all the cards at the moment. His decision was ultimately where they would pivot towards. The compromise sounds fine to me. Just 2 otherworlders, minus me, will be required for the southern continent outreach. You won't be tagging along? Lucielle asked, her brows raised as she stared hard at Ray. No. He responded flatly. The chaperone will be Ader. I have another engagement that I have to deal with. It had been over a week since they last saw each other, and just when Ray was beginning to suspect that their alliance had dissolved, he got a message from Adrian. It seems the plan is still ongoing. Whether or not it was a trap didn't matter to Ray at this point, especially after considering Alicia's situation. As long as the means to return home exists in the north, I have to investigate it somehow. Following Adrian's plan is the best means I know of at the moment. Right now, while the United Human Alliance was concerned about the inevitable assault of the dragons, and a few other worlders would have to be dispatched to the south, he had his own business situated in the north. I have something to tell all of you. Ray began, inhaling deeply as he prepared himself for the impact of the news he was about to reveal. He had already made up his mind too, so all of this was merely ceremonial. Chapter 755 News from Adrian. Ray lay on his bed, contemplating the meeting that would take place the following day, and all he could make was a sigh. He was planning to pitch his plan of allying with the denizens of the South, and he could already picture the image of disapproval that he would get if he did so. That didn't mean he was going to give up, but still. It was a bit dreadful to think about. Right as he concluded on that thought, another one regarding Adrian popped into his head. We didn't particularly leave things off on a positive note, and I already confirmed from Emile that he had been trying to seduce her. Especially after noticing how my relationship with her was strained. That would have brought into question the boy's reliability, but Ray already knew he couldn't trust Adrian completely. The boy intrinsically operated on his own self-interest, and the only reason Ray was being carried along with his plan was most likely because he needed him. Not sure that still applies now. He hasn't contacted me ever since he and Emile left together. With Emile now with me, I wonder what he'll do. Strangely enough, Ray didn't feel any sort of anger or animosity towards Adrian. Perhaps that was natural. I've never trusted him. But now, somehow, it seems I have to. He narrowed his eyes as he sat upright on his bed. Alicia wanted to leave H-Tray, and he also had to consider the safety of his other classmates. Besides, having access to that gateway could be key in saving as many people as possible from the world's eventual destruction. If I can somehow copy the effects, isn't it possible that I can use it at will? That was his rationale behind the serious consideration he had towards Adrian's plan. He still didn't know the full details, or whether he could even trust Adrian on the fundamentals of their agreement, but if there was a chance he could get what he wanted, he would have to take it while making preparations for potential betrayal. All of this is contingent on whether or not he actually comes through. Ray shrugged as he decided to return to his sleeping posture. Right as he was about to do so, though, he heard a knock on his door. The peculiar presence behind the door caused Ray to instantly teleport right in front of it, twisting the knob just as quickly. The entity he found there was just as he expected, an undead. Master Adrian sent me to deliver this letter to you. The entity was translucent, like a ghost, with a pale sickly face and a body that softly bounced in the air as it floated. It had somewhat long hair, looking somewhat androgynous, though the voice made it clear that this was a male. I see. Ray took the letter from the ghost, a small smile forming on his face as he did so. So he did reach out. I see. Ray took the letter from the ghost, a small smile forming on his face as he did so. So he did reach out. I shall now take my leave. Wait. The moment Ray said this, the figure froze in its track, ceasing its vanishing act. How am I supposed to contact him? He was yet to read the letter, but Ray could already guess its contents. Of course, he didn't have enough hubris to think that he knew everything Adrian wrote, but he could make a few educated guesses. If he was right, then some kind of reply would be necessary. He told me you would ask that. He also told me to tell you that you'd know what to do when you read the letter. And if I refuse to read it? The undead once again spoke mechanically, as a mouthpiece for its master. Then you'll be missing out on one of the greatest opportunities you're ever going to get. That is what he told me to tell you. Ray smiled even broader once he heard this. We'll see about that, won't we? He sent the ghost on its way after that conversation, and the entity disappeared as soon as permission was granted. His body coiled into itself, and in a rapid swirl, it completed its vanishing act. Nice trick. Ray had copied it, but he reckoned he would have to sacrifice it for stat points, mainly for two reasons. One was obvious: his skill slots in had gotten pretty bloated thanks to the many skills he copied from Emil, who was able to get them from Adrian. As such, he had to get rid of any skill that overlapped with a more useful or powerful skill in his arsenal. The second was something more perspective. I'll be needing as many stats as I can get if I'm going to take his deal. With that in mind, Ray sat on his bed and cast several defensive skills and spells on himself and his surroundings before opening the letter. Once all the precautions had been made, he opened it and read its content. Hello there. Feels a bit awkward writing this to you after what happened last time. Apologies or explanations are unnecessary, and they would frankly be dishonest. Due to that reason, I'll skip over that until we meet in person and go straight to the point. I've successfully entered the system, but as expected, I don't have the necessary freedom required to explore the Dragon Continent and locate the Chamber of Ancients, the goal for this entire expedition. It's why I need your help. I hear Alicia has finally woken up from her slumber, and I can bet that she's feeling pretty homesick at this point. Now is a better time than ever to consider a serious partnership and also make good on your side of the deal to join forces and find us both a way home. If working together still sounds good to you, then find a way to reach me. I'm currently writing from my dorm room in the Dragon Academy of the Empire. It's located in the academic city right next to the capital, but I can't even go beyond the walls anytime soon. I'll need your assistance for that. I look forward to your favorable response. Chapter 756, The Clairvoyant. Once Ray finished reading the letter, he felt a myriad of emotions, but the most prevalent one was amusement. School? For real? He chuckled to himself. Who would have thought that I'd be returning to that sort of space in a fantasy world like this? I see. So, he decided to infiltrate the Empire as a student. Or rather, that is the best way he'll get integrated into the system and become accepted as part of the Empire. Ray had already suspected that Adrian's valiant efforts in the war against the elves would be insufficient to earn him a spot among the dragons, even if it happened to be recorded on tape. Was he being optimistic? Or did he also envision this situation? I'm not sure, but one thing was for sure. He's currently stuck, or he appears to be. There's only one real way to verify, and while I'm a bit hesitant to do this, I need to take precautions in order to respond appropriately. Closing his eyes, he took in a deep breath and called forth the name of the skill he wanted to employ. His second SSS tier skill. That instant, Ray's consciousness was transported to a much different landscape than what he had around him or what could possibly exist in the world. It felt like a blank space, within which there were several mirrors that displayed varying things. It never gets old. He smiled to himself, recalling the first time he tried out the skill and nearly got overwhelmed by the confusing cluster of information that was available for his consumption. With, I can see anything that is happening anywhere, at any point in time. It was an overpowered ability, but there were several limitations not on the skill, but on his current self that made it difficult for him to use it. For one, the further into the future or past he wanted to look into, the more mana he would have to expend. This skill took a lot of mana just to function properly, so the exorbitant sum to look very far into the future was a luxury Ray could not yet afford. The second, more important limitation, was the issue of memory. The simplest way to put it was that Ray had limited cognitive abilities, including information storage, and so for every time he used to take in information, a portion of that storage would be taken up. This effect could not be undone, and the information gotten from could not be taken back. Hence, it was a permanent effect of the skill. Even the Oracle had a problem with this, so I have to use the skill sparingly. He sighed to himself. Though, this was one of the times when he had to utilize it. If Adrian is lying about something, or luring me into a trap, I have to be prepared, don't I? With this rationale, he focused his thoughts on Adrian and the Dragon Academy, both the person and place, and found all the mirrors converging to form a rather large mirror that allowed him to view the current whereabouts of the boy in question. Adrian Chase was actually in his dorm, and he was studying. Haha. Why is this funny to me? He was flipping his textbook and writing on the note, both of which were neatly placed on his rather exquisite-looking table. The whole setup resembled the modern world of Earth a little too much, and a single look at the dorm room confirmed this. It's all so modern. His thoughts trailed. This was his first real glimpse into the Dragon continent, and he already found himself rather impressed and curious. Okay, let's not get sidetracked. Ray had figured out where Adrian was at the moment, but that wasn't enough to confirm if this was legitimate or not. For all I know, he could be there temporarily and lying about his inability to leave. Just to be safe, I'll look into both his past and future and see if he's being honest about things. Of course, these would be restricted to the academy, since it was the only location that Ray was certain that Adrian was occupying. Let's go for a few days and see. Just as Adrian professed, he was constantly in the academy, and he would continue to be there as well. Good. Looks like I can trust his words. There was the slim possibility that Adrian was putting up an act still, since he would think of Ray spying on him to test the legitimacy of his statement. But since there was no way Adrian could detect the spying power of an SSS tier skill, he found it highly unlikely. Plus, using any further for this would be a waste. In the end, he had to take the bull by the horns and invest some measure of trust in Adrian's words. Or maybe Ader. Ray cancelled his, returning his mind to the regular plane of reality. Once he opened his eyes, he already found Ader waiting for him, his head bowed as he made a gentlemanly pose. You called for me, master? Yes. I got this from Adrian. Why don't you read it and tell me what you think? The letter instantly floated from Ray's grasp and found its way to Ader within a second. The red-haired familiar wasted no time in reading through its content. Despite his expression showing how diligently he analyzed every word on the piece of paper, the speed at which he finished the letter made it seem like he schemed through the content. I'm done, and let's see. Rubbing his chin, Ader sighed and told Ray the answer that the latter already predicted. You should start getting ready to go to school. So you think it's legit? I do. Ader nodded, maintaining his calm smile as he returned the letter to him. Why do you think so? For a moment, he said nothing. It almost felt like Ader was sorting through a lot of thoughts, but he finally spoke up. Well, for a host of reasons. Let me begin. Chapter 757 Dilemma of the Strong. And that's why I think he's being honest. Once Ader was done with his analysis, Ray found himself nearly dumbfounded by the intelligence that his familiar displayed. From a psychological analysis of Adrian, to the content of the letter, and the materials, age, and a host of other factors utilized in his detailed interrogation of the subject matter. It all led to Ader's fine conclusion. I see. In the end, it was no different from what showed him. Should I have just asked Ader from the start rather than use? No. No, this way is better. Ray told himself. He had become too reliant on Ader, and that was not a good thing. Plus, if Ader told him something that reinforced what he already knew to be true, then that meant he could rely on his words. But what if he never checked? Then how would he know to rely on those words? Especially after the oracle warned him. I can understand why she warned me against him, though. Even discounting Ader's intelligence and raw cunning, there was one more issue that made him incredibly scary. Your specified target is not compatible with this skill. I can't use on Ader. Why couldn't he do that? Why could he see Ader's status window, but couldn't see his past, future, or present whereabouts and actions with an SSS tier skill? It made no sense to Ray. Should I ask him about it? No. Not yet. He could already predict how the whole thing would go. Ader would either feign ignorance, mentioning how his memory was not complete, and how he didn't know the details behind himself. Or he would finally retaliate. He's smarter than I am, and there's a possibility that the system window that I'm seeing right now isn't the correct one. Ray carefully told himself. Though his calm demeanor projected something else. Right now, he appears to be on my side, and he's also very good at his job. I should leave it at that. That was Ray's decision. At least, until Ader slipped up or he found enough information that would prompt him into action. Looks like I'll have to start packing then. He smiled at the familiar, and the latter smiled back. You are dismissed. Ader bowed once again and vanished, causing Ray to leak out a bead of sweat and sigh in relief. He makes me so nervous, even though I'm supposed to be stronger than him. Ray had become phenomenally stronger than ever, and he was even Ader's master, yet he still felt this unease anytime he was in his presence. The reason is obvious, isn't it? He collapsed on his bed, staring at his open status window with a stoic expression. Name Ray Skylar. Race human. Class singularity. Level 270. Life force, 13,000. Monolevel, 39,000. Combat ability, 21,550. Stat points, 57,900. Skills. Skills. Alignment neutral good. You have done the impossible and stand at the precipice of power. As such, you now possess the interest of this world. Doppel. Merger. Perfect calm. Sacrifice. Symbiosis. Consume. Perfect mimicry. Domain of man. Clairvoyance. Divine weapon creation. Perfect divine magic. Divine power ascension. Perfect divine ray. Divine magic supremacy. Perfect domain of the divine. Perfect divine defense. Perfect divine regeneration. Perfect divine appraisal. Perfect divine martial supremacy. Perfect divine growth. Perfect divine form. Perfect divine adaptability. Unbreakable. Wish fulfillment. Divine magic interference. Tempera. Divine persona. Perfect wish fulfillment. It is written. Absolute myriad breath. Absolute energy pulse. Absolute mass stun. Absolute mana recovery. Absolute intuition. Absolute cry. Absolute comprehension. Perfect reflection. Absolute illusory allure. Absolute executioner. Perfect decorum. Perfect collapse. Symbiosis. Consume. Perfect mimicry. Equip limit break. Deep anticipation. Command code. Pinocchio. Status interference. Idle gamble. Perfect veil. Last one standing. Fertility inducement. Miasma aura. Nature affinity. Venom. Perfect float. Inventory. Mind touch. Link. Where evil lurks. Banishment. Full comprehension. Collapse. Grand darkness. Grand luck. A lot had changed since he left the land of the elves, especially in terms of his skills and stats. Really comes in handy here. The skill allowed him to passively earn stat points by staking stat points, sort of like investment. The more unused stat points he had, the higher the increase. After sacrificing the skills I wouldn't be using, I had a little over 50,000 stats. To think I've gotten so much already. It's crazy. By his estimates, Ray had to let go of over 20 decent skills due to their overlap with his current skills. If he counted the other miscellaneous skills he received from the elves before his departure, there had to be tons of them, over 100 in all honesty. Those were the things that propped up his stat points to such a degree. I have to leave them there, though. At least until I really need them. Even while looking at such big numbers and remembering just where he started from, Ray couldn't help but be unimpressed. Despite becoming so powerful, nothing much had changed regarding his standing in the world. He had enemies he couldn't yet defeat, and he had many worries that threatened to drown him. He had allies he couldn't fully trust, and limitations to his freedom. Closing his eyes, he murmured to himself before going to sleep. How much stronger do I need to get before it gets easier? Chapter 758 Summit Conclusion. I'll be going to the Dragon Continent. As expected, no one took it well. The instant his words settled in the mind of everyone in the hall, there was an uproar. The audience, both from the side of the Otherworlders as well as the dignitaries of the United Human Alliance, gasped in shock, and they instantly raised their voice in confusion. Are you for real? That's crazy. Ray. You can't be serious. It's too dangerous. Please don't. Before they could say much, though, Ray raised his hand and stopped them in their tracks. I can't properly hear you if you speak all at once. He sighed. His tone and expression were calm, and despite the myriad of expressions that the people around him had, he maintained a perfectly stoic demeanor. I expected this kind of reaction from them. It's big news, after all. Plus, he never actually told anyone of his deal with Adrian except Ader, who was the only one maintaining a calm smile through it all. Everyone else was freaking out. Don't worry. I'll be going undercover. I'm not going there to stir up conflict. He explained. The mission is considerably important, and while it's currently confidential, I can guarantee that it's for the sake of everyone that I go. He considered telling everyone the details of his plan with Adrian, but after putting proper thoughts into it, he decided not to. The less people know about this, the better. It wasn't that he didn't trust his comrades, but it was more preferable to keep the circle of people who knew about it small. Not only to prevent understandable pushback, but also to endure there were no cracks that the enemy could employ. Everyone else is going to be busy with one thing or the other. There's a chance that they might encounter enemies that inspect their minds. I can't allow my plans of infiltrating the Dragon Academy to be revealed. How will you pull it off, though? Lucielle was the first to speak up after everyone fell silent. Her crimson eyes showed genuine curiosity rather than sheer concern. I'll disguise myself as a dragon. I won't be able to tell you the details, but I've started making practical plans regarding it. I see. And you're confident you won't get caught? I am. She fell silent after that, though her gaze was still on him. Must you go alone? This time, it was Alicia who spoke up, concern etched on her face. It seemed she had a lot more to say, but she held those words back and merely focused on the question. Yes. Esme won't be there. She raised a brow. What? No. So which girl is it this time? There's no girl. Everyone in the room was quiet as they watched the back and forth between Alicia and Ray. The two of them had rather serious expressions for the kind of topic they were breaching. It was nearly amusing. Ray and Alico, sitting on a tree, kiss. Iya. Justin was stopped from completing his rather childish commentary on the matter. He was merely mumbling those words, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. He received a few glares, which forced him to retreat into his shell. In any case, I'll be leaving in a few days. I can drop those who are heading to the battlefield off before going to the northern continent. As for the ones heading to the south, they would be sorted out by Ader. Even if I can't use directly on Ader, I can use it on others. It's one of the reasons why I chose to involve at least one or two other worlders and not let him go on his own. As for the people he wanted to head for the mission, it had to be Justin and Belle since the both of them were going to fully cooperate with Ader. He already informed me of his arrangement with Justin, and I used to confirm it as a test run. Then, I know Belle is rather fond of Ader. To the point of obsession, even. In essence, they would be able to do anything Ader asked without exception. Cooperation is key in these matters, so it's fine to leave things to them. As for the battlefield, he could leave that to Clark and Tricia. They were the most adept at combat anyway apart from Belle, of course. The real problem was Alicia. I don't know where to place her. The battlefield could be too intense for her, and I don't feel comfortable leaving her in Ader's care. Once again, Ray felt like he was unconsciously putting himself in the space of making decisions for people who were active agents on their own. He was trying to arbitrarily decide what was right for Alicia, not what would be best for the current situation. Perhaps he was wrong in doing so. But isn't it normal to be like this when it comes to someone you love? Of course, I won't enforce anything. It'll just be a suggestion. Whatever Alicia chose would ultimately be what she would end up with. I nominate Justin and Belle for the mission in the south. They seem to be the most supportive of the idea, which leaves Clark and Tricia for the front lines. And Alicia. I'm going to the front lines too. She spoke up. I suspected as much. Despite her perspective of the world of H-Tray, Alicia's personality was one that made her want to help the people around her. Right now, those people were the humans in the Alliance. Are you sure? You could stay back and protect the capital, or the rest of the Alliance in case of another dragon attack. My abilities are best utilized on the battlefield. Besides, I don't think it's safe for me to use my skill around innocent people. She gave Ader a particular glare as she uttered those last words. It caused Ray to make a wry smile, nodding in perfect understanding. All right. Got it? Logically speaking, Alicia's abilities would indeed be best used in the battlefield, so there was no real complaint he could make if that was what she wanted. As usual, Brutus and Lucielle would also head to the battlefield with the other worlders, which meant everyone's roles were pretty much settled. Except, there's something I'm missing. Chapter 759, Lucille's Resurgence. The meeting ended on a rather anticlimactic note once the most important issue, the imminent war, was addressed. After that, the discussion simply pivoted into the political and economic state of the alliance. So far, everything was moving smoothly. The only aspect that was really suffering was education, but that was pretty natural during times of war. Besides, it wasn't like it particularly concerned the meeting, so not much emphasis was placed on it. Once all the pertinent matters were addressed, everyone was dismissed, and groups began to form as they all left the hall. Clark, Tricia, and Justin got together. Belle rushed to Ada's side, and Brutus along with Lucy went to escort Conrad and Vita to their chambers. Ray was already moving towards Alicia, as the two of them already knew they had a lot to discuss pending the time they would be separated for their respective missions. However, sorry to butt in, but I need to borrow Ray for a minute. Lucielle suddenly popped up in their middle, completely out of nowhere, and had the usual enthusiastic smile plastered on her beautiful face. Oh. Ray was taken aback by the suddenness of it all. Not only was it because he wanted to spend quality time with Alicia as he had been doing for the past couple of days, but also because he was also thinking about Lucielle right before she appeared. Come on. It won't take long, she said, folding her hands as she pleaded with her eyes. I was going to look for her after my time with Alicia, but could this actually be perfect timing? He wondered to himself, looking at Alicia, who was already shrugging. I'll be waiting for you at the library. Thanks, he whispered, nodding at her as she walked away. It felt nice to be understood that way, though he did feel a little bad for not being able to escort Alicia to their usual meeting spot. Still, business before pleasure. He gave his full attention to Lucielle, whose cheeks were currently pink while smiling a little creepily at him. What is it? He had to ask, since she wasn't saying anything and was just squealing pretty loudly. You really like her, don't you? SHHH. You're too loud, idiot. I mean. Sorry about that. Sometimes, Lucielle made him forget she was a few years older than him. That was why he was able to cover her mouth and call her an idiot despite the age gap. She didn't seem to mind either one, though. Relax. I cast sound magic around us, so no one can hear anything. So that's what it was. He could sense all the mana around, and he knew there was a spell at work, but since he couldn't be affected by it, he didn't bother with the details. It turned out Lucielle actually put in more thought to the question than he expected. And what if I say I do? He responded. Kya? Nothing. Nothing at all. It's just so interesting watching romance like this. She grinned with playful delight. Have you told her yet? No. He responded very sharply, hoping she would drop it. She didn't. Will you tell her? How is that any of your business? He wanted to say, but controlled himself and chose a rather straightforward answer. No. There was no point in telling Alicia his feelings if she was going to leave him and this world anyway. I should even begin to move on, but the only other person he had feelings for who he also knew felt the same about him wasn't he particularly on the best of terms with him. He still hadn't spoken to Esme since he returned to the capital, and from what Carrot told him, she didn't want to speak to or about him. She's probably trying to get over me. Or maybe she already has. It was amazing enough that someone like Esme would like him, but it was even more amazing that he managed to blow it. Alicia. Esme. It was best to give up on both girls. Perhaps all girls in general. Why won't you confess? None of your business, Luciel. Just tell me what you want already. He sighed, holding his head as if he had a headache. Humph, what a square. Yeah. TCH. Anyway, come with me. Luciel cast a teleportation spell around them, causing everything to distort. In a sharp gust of wind and energy, the two of them vanished from their positions and appeared somewhere else. It was a vast room, with a large magic circle at its very center. Floating lamps provided illumination to the room, and there were several bookshelves that also lay suspended in the air. The floor itself was bare, save for the magic circle and the other engravings that decorated the ground and even walls of the massive room. Items upon items were carefully arranged on shelves and desks, all of them floating in the air, threatening to descend at any given moment. The room was filled with mana, and that was only natural when practically every item in the vast space seemed to be saturated with the energy. Welcome, Ray. With the snap of her fingers, her outfit completely changed to something more casual, a large long-sleeved shirt and a shirt skirt, with stockings hiding her pale feet. A staff appeared in her hand, and a rather large mage hat gracefully sat on her white hair. She floated in the air, with twinkling sparks of magic dancing around her feet, and a bright smile encapsulated her gorgeous face. To my inner sanctum. Ray's eyes analyzed everything within seconds, and a wide grin formed on his face once he was done. Impressive. I didn't know such a place existed in the royal estate. This isn't the royal estate. It's a special dimension I made using magic. You can do that? Yup. Ray was impressed. This was similar to Domain of Man, except most of the objects here seemed to be actual items that Luciel must have brought to the space at one point or the other. She had to have been stockpiling her belongings here for quite some time if she was able to decorate it with such precision. She's quite versatile. That's good. Once again, he got the confirmation that she was just the person he was looking for. But first, why exactly did you want to speak with me? Why here? Boo. I gave you this excellent presentation and you're not even impressed? Just what will it take to properly amaze you? I don't know, but you can start by answering my question. Ray spoke rather bluntly. He was simply going to let her remain ignorant about his already favorable impression of her. If he didn't consider her impressive, he wouldn't be thinking about what was currently going on in his mind. Well, remember our last conversation? I told you to give me enough time to come up with something that even you can't ignore. Once I did that, you'd have a serious conversation with me about magic. Yeah. I remember. How could he forget? That was the bargain she made with him during their dance together at the gala. Well. Prepare to be amazed. I've finally perfected something after spending nearly a decade developing. Luciel grinned, raising her staff in the air. Ray's eyes widened as he prepared himself for what he was about to witness. You won't be able to refuse me after this. Chapter 760, The Grand Mage's Show. Luciel was a genius since birth. Her entire childhood had been nothing but magic, and even now as an adult it was all she could think about. Due to her innate skills, as well as her incredible pool of mana, she was always bound to excel greatly in the field. However, rather than simply relying on her exceptional talent, Luciel made sure to diligently study and understand magic. There was a level she needed to achieve, one where mere talent couldn't get her to. That was why she became the Grand Mage. No one, absolutely no one, was better than her at magic. Watch closely. She told Ray, her ruby eyes glowing brightly as he raised her staff in the air. The spectator did as he was told. He focused completely on whatever she was about to show him, remaining stationary as he used all his senses to concentrate on her. A lot of mana is building up. He noticed the surge of energy, but didn't feel any sort of leakage or waste. Usually, when a mage or warrior utilized mana, some of it would leak out to their surrounding bodies. This ended up creating pressure around them, warding enemies off if the energy was very intense. But Lucielle was different. There was no pressure whatsoever. Every single ounce of mana flowed seamlessly through her body, conducted perfectly by her staff. Not a single drop was wasted. Then, Black Void, she whispered, casting the spell without any need to chant. Despite paying rapt attention to the spell, Ray nearly missed the incredibly swift reaction of what played out before him. That is, his eyes widened, breaking down the component energies and laws that gathered near the tip of Lucille's staff. The dark sphere that stood above her had a ring swirling around it, and while it remained stable for just a moment, its true effects kicked in barely a second later. It instantly began to suck in the air and everything around it, all except Lucielle, who cast the spell. The black sphere absorbed the mana that saturated the air, causing it to grow larger by the second, until it neared Ray and began to suck him in as well. Through it all, his eyes were wide open in disbelief. What he was witnessing was a black hole, created by a spell from Lucielle. This wasn't merely the result of spatial magic, as he could see the fundamental differences between this and any other spatial collapse. This one distorts space-time, sucks everything to its very center, and breaks them down perfectly like a proper black hole should. The closer anything got to its center, the lesser the natural laws and even the effects of mana would apply, since everything would dissolve before a proper spell or skill could be cast. That had to be scary. I can see the process clearly. Everything that gets sucked in gets perfectly broken down and vanishes into the void. He smiled, nodding his head as he reached out for the hole. Hey. That's dangerous. Lucielle instantly cancelled the spell right before Ray could allow himself to experience its dark touch. Her eyes widened with disbelief. A bead of sweat formed on her face as she looked at him, almost as if he was a crazy man. That would have ripped you to shreds. I specifically contained the spell, so its suction power wouldn't exceed its immediate vicinity. I planned to make it implode on itself right as it was about to reach you, but you just had to. Never mind. She sighed, slightly steamy breaths proceeding from her glossy lips. Ray was silent for a while, his arm still extended forward. You used time, gravity, and spatial magic to create that thing, right? He muttered, now placing his gaze solely on the Grand Mage herself. Correct. She grinned widely. All her exhaustion seemed to vanish completely, and she beamed as she normally would. Those are three rather difficult kinds of magic to master, especially the first. I can't believe you pulled something like this off. Ray could understand why she spent so many years on this spell. The mere idea that a human in H-Tray could use three of the most difficult kinds of magic in perfect synergy to create something like a black hole was absurd. Her spell is equivalent to a skill of the Grand Tier, but if the hole kept growing and sucking sufficient mana, it could grow even higher. That was his analysis on the matter. I bet you can utilize this spell in many ways. No, not just the spell, but the combination of those elements. You just wanted to show me a flashy example for your presentation, didn't you? Ray asked. The true achievement here was her perfect magic control, and the mere fact that she could replicate a natural phenomenon under her stipulated conditions. Yeah, you're correct. There are varying application methods, as you've said. The problem remains mana consumption, though. Lucielle responded with a rather exhausted sigh. That spell alone drains over half of my mana. I'm still looking for ways to efficiently utilize it without suffering as much drawback. I see. Even at that, Ray was impressed. It's crazy how she's able to do all of this despite being A tier. Even with all my skills granting me a perfect crutch, I couldn't come up with ingenious ways to use magic like this. This just went to show the difference between pure dedication and talent. I wonder how powerful she could be if she transcends this level, though. Ray wondered as he appraised her from where he stood. Those numbers don't do her justice. Name, Lucielle. Race human, class, Grand Mage. Level 275, Life Force, 600-350. Mana level, 500/1,250-500. Combat ability, 700-200. Stat points, 0. Skills. Skills. Alignment chaotic good. The most powerful human in all of H-Tray, and she is yet to reach the fullness of her potential. She currently serves as the Grand Mage of the UHA, but her true passion has little to do with service and more to do with exploration. She has a keen interest in Ray Skylar. Chapter 761 Recommendation. The numbers are absurd by H-Tray standards, but Ray couldn't help but feel incredibly underwhelmed when staring at Lucille's status window. Not only were the numbers much lower than what he had been used to over time, a side effect of being surrounded by powerful elves, facing dragons, and obsessing over his own strength, but even the scarcity of skills troubled him. Humans have a limit of 5 skills. Right now, she has 2 A tier, 2 B tier, and 1 C tier skills. I know they're absurd by human standards here, but I honestly feel like they should be a lot more. He almost sighed. Her additional information still did her justice, regardless. I don't think I've seen any H-Tray human with base stats reaching 1,000. If I add all her privileges and items, then all her stats exceed 1,000, and the mana point even exceeds 2. That's impressive. Compared to Brutus, she was a considerable step higher, though he was a worthy contender for close second. I guess these aren't the 2 monoliths of the United Human Alliance for nothing. If he remembered correctly, Lucielle wasn't this strong when he first saw through her stat window. She had to have gotten much stronger over the course of time. He liked that about her. Somehow, she's always better than she was before. It's fascinating, but also inspiring. Makes me want to try my best. Ray decided not to rely on the skill he just acquired through, instead creating the process he just witnessed on his own by casting the spell. Black Void. Whoosh. A small sphere appeared atop his palm, with a ring also dancing atop it. He made sure to regulate the suction power, just as Lucielle told him she did, and also reduce the size, so it wouldn't grow as large even when sucking in air and mana. It was amazing how he was able to get it right on the first try. What? You just... No way. I spent years working on that and you just... Ray, who was initially engrossed in the spell, heard Lucille's devastated cry and looked at her. She had tears streaming down her eyes as she looked at him. My bad. He swiftly cancelled the process, forcing the black sphere's implosion within a second. That didn't make the situation any less awkward, though. Now I feel bad. I shouldn't have tried it out in front of her, but I guess I got a little carried away. He thought to himself. Even though he successfully accomplished the same thing that Lucielle achieved, it wasn't like he felt any sense of pride in it. I was able to see the full process thanks to my incredible senses. So I understood the components and the interactions of the elements perfectly well. Ever since he acclimated to his enhanced vision, having no need for his eye patch any longer, Ray's ability to understand magic-related occurrences had skyrocketed. And this wasn't even counting the other passive skills at work that made his calculative, observative, and overall cognitive skills improve dramatically. Unlike Luciel, who had to figure everything from scratch, he had a perfect example before him. Besides, casting the spell turned out to be very easy thanks to my two divine magic-based skills. He nearly laughed at himself. Perfect divine magic and divine magic supremacy allowed him to create his own spells based on loose ideas. And the rules were rather lax with him, unlike the complicated process that Luciel was bound by. It was inevitable that he would be able to flawlessly match Luciel's level of skill when it came to that single spell, and probably every other one she showed him. I could also achieve the same result by simply using the new skill that formed thanks to seeing her use the spell. I swear, this is so unfair. The decade-long efforts of Luciel ended up being perfectly ripped off by him. And, unlike her, I can make the spell more powerful and have more than enough mana to maintain it. He almost felt bad about how easy it was, since he was now beginning to see more and more of his potential. I'm really too overpowered at this point. Of course, his ego was easily shattered once the image of the oracle flashed in his mind, and he remembered just how humbling his experience with her was. If he tried any funny business with the Dragon Emperor, he suspected that would be the same experience he would suffer. Damn it. I don't know what else to do. Luciel interrupted his thoughts by yelling and crashing on the ground. I thought, for sure, that this would impress you. Yet you just replicated it so easily. Her troubled expression caused him to feel a little prickle in his heart. It wasn't her fault that he was simply built different in every single sense of the word. I should comfort her. After finally deciding this, he reached for her shoulder. Trying his best to smile warmly while thinking of the best words of encouragement he could render to someone being outdone by their junior. You should. You. This is so frustrating. But that doesn't mean I'll give up. She jumped back to her feet, nearly grazing Ray with her chest. She's too energetic. Mark my words, Ray Skylar. The next spell I create will blow your mind away. Even you won't be able to resist my awesomeness. Ray's mind was already blown away by her presentation, but he didn't think she would believe it if he simply told her. Besides, it didn't matter what new spell she came up with. I could just copy it all the same. Watching her bright smile and optimistic smile, however, made Ray feel a certain kind of way. He really admired the passion that Luciel was showing. Just as I thought. She's the perfect person for the role. Parting his lips while still maintaining eye contact with Luciel, Ray finally blurted out his intentions. Do you want to go to the Dragon Continent with me? Chapter 762 Blissful Conclusion. Yet. Luciel appeared dumbfounded by Ray's question. The truth is, I also wanted to see you. Your knowledge and versatility in magic is necessary for the mission I want to accomplish in the Dragon Empire. It would really be helpful if you came with me. For real. Most people would shake in fear once they heard that they were being nominated to infiltrate the territory of the enemy, but not Luciel. Yes, she was trembling, but it wasn't out of fear at all. The pink hues on her cheek, her wide eyes filled with both excitement and shock. And the loud squeals that burst from her mouth were enough to let anyone know that she felt the furthest thing from fear. Instead, she was overjoyed. For real. Ray said to her. I take it that you're interested. Yes. Oh, yes. 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 She dashed to Ray, nearly pressing her voluptuous chest on him as she went for a hug. Thankfully for him, he was an expert at spatial magic, so he easily created sufficient distance between the two of them. HAAA. In any case, it's safe to say that you impressed me with your presentation today. He began, observing how Lucille's bright beam became even more blinding. I also have a lot to learn regarding magic, and so I look forward to that long talk that you proposed we have regarding magic. I really want to share ideas with you and also pick your brains regarding some thoughts I have. Lucille did her best to be quiet, but the more she held it in, the redder her face got, and the louder her squeals became. She even began fidgeting on the spot. Ray ignored all of this, however, and proceeded with his talk. However, all of that will have to be postponed until after we return from the academy. Academy. AHH. I guess I didn't inform you yet. Ray lightly slapped his head, instantly correcting himself. The place we're heading to is the Dragon Academy of the Empire. Literal heat began to rise from Lucille's head as she heard all of this. Stars manifested from her eyes, and after holding her scream in for so long, she finally hit her limit and let her voice loose. Ria, you're the beast. Once again, she rushed to hug him, but using spatial layering, he was able to prevent any such interaction between the two of them. Well, I'm glad to see you excited about all of this. I'm more than excited. I finally get to satisfy my curiosity and learn magic from the dragon's perspective. The reason we've been lagging behind them isn't merely due to our difference in stats, but also information. If I can get access to their magic and study how they activate it, then isn't it possible that I know, we can grow stronger? Think about the possibilities. We could. As Lucille rambled on about her passion, Ray watched her with a soft smile on his face while going over the more realistic and practical reasons why he was letting someone like Lucille tag along with him. It was for nothing more than the Chamber of Ancients. I'm not confident that I'll be able to figure out or manipulate the ancient magic that will lead us home. Adrian has made it clear that he also hasn't figured that part out yet, which means she's our best bet. Since it was Lucille's field of expertise, if there was anyone with the ability to tweak the magic to send them to Earth, it had to be her. I still don't think it's a good idea to tell her about the whole plan yet, though. He didn't know how the Grand Mage of the Alliance would react to being complicit in sending their summoned otherworlders back to where they came from. But he had a feeling her reaction wouldn't be good. At least, until he got a full handle of the situation and understood Lucille enough to trust her with the plan, Ray planned to be silent about that bit. My second option would have been Faralia, since she's also the most powerful among the elves. She also has expertise in runes, but considering Lucille is far more skilled in magic, and has proven herself to be more versatile, I think she's the best pick. Plus, since she was the one mostly responsible for the otherworlder summon, she remained the most optimal choice. And it's a good thing I don't have to convince her to tag along. So when are we leaving again? Lucille popped right in front of Ray, her wide smile and bulging eyes appearing super creepy despite her pretty face. Dude. Ray took a few steps back, not out of shock, but just to avoid contact with her. Thankfully, she didn't approach him any further. 3 days. He responded. 3 days, huh? That's enough time to prepare, then. As for your disguise as a dragon, don't worry about that. I've got it covered. Lucille grinned with delight, giving a thumbs up. Is she getting overexcited about this whole thing? It's not that I don't trust her, but disguise is very important if we are to properly blend in. Are you certain? The Grand Mage nodded, giving Ray a rather serious smile. It was one that brimmed with maturity, something even she was capable of at times. Yeah. Trust me. Despite still being skeptical, Ray decided to take her at her word. Besides, this was yet another avenue for him to be surprised by her. All right then. I suppose this concludes our meeting. Yeah. You should get back to talking with Alicia about lovey-dovey stuff. She teased with a rather big smile. That's now what we talk about. Didn't you tell her you weren't taking any girl on your adventure this time? I wonder how you'll explain yourself to her. Ah, that's true. Hold on, stop making this worse. Ray didn't know why and how Lucielle became so adept at teasing him like this, but it wasn't a particularly bad feeling. Perhaps this was something that had developed over time, or it was simply a result of their just concluded meeting, but Ray found that he and the Grand Mage now spoke freely with each other. Almost as if they were friends. In any case. Bye. Don't you need me to? I'll show myself out. Ray yelled out, and in a single flash of light, he vanished from Lucille's mystical domain. She watched as he did this, amazed once again by his overall prowess, particularly in magic. Ray Schuyler. What an interesting man. She never would have expected the ordinary-looking boy from back then to become such a monumental success as a mage. Could this be the one I've been searching for? The one that can lead me to the zenith, to transcendence? She didn't know yet. Ray never displayed any phenomenal insight or affinity regarding magic, unlike Adonis, which was why she didn't really notice him. He was always one of the background characters, but all of that had now changed. It's selfish of me to desire all of this, I know, but I can't help it, can I? Clasping her hands on her face, she gave a euphoric smile and sent her gaze up high. HAAA. Chapter 763, Meeting with Ader. Ha! Ray collapsed on his bed, feeling the soft bouncy effect on his back as he did so. A warm smile circulated his face as he closed his eyes and recollected a lot of fun aspects of his just concluded meeting with Alicia. No, calling it a meeting made it sound too boorish. They hung out in their dedicated spot, the library, and spoke about tons of stuff. It was beyond fun for him, and he could see that their talks did a lot to cheer Alicia up as well. Her divine summon killed Billy and a lot of the people in the capital. It also destroyed so much. Not many people could see it, but Ray knew full well that Alicia was hurting due to consequences of her actions. It was a miracle that she could pull herself together and laugh with him. According to her words, "There's just something about you, Ray. Being around you just makes me forget all those horrible things. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have you." It made him feel a little guilty for leaving her so he could go to the Dragon Empire, which further raised the difficulty of him telling her about his arrangement with Lucielle. He nearly even postponed it, until he had a reality check with himself. I promised myself not to lie to her. He sighed. Still, just as I suspected, she didn't take it too well. Alicia wanted to come with him after he brought up Lucielle, but he had to refuse. Despite how much it made his heart bleed, there was no way he could expose her to any kind of danger. This wasn't the land of the elves, or some vacation. It was the heart of the enemy's domain. It's already risky bringing Lucielle along, but she serves a great purpose. He inhaled deeply, relieved that he was actually able to convince Alicia to drop the issue. Still, what was this ominous feeling he had? I don't even want to think about it right now. There are a lot of unknown variables that I need to consider if I'm bringing Lucielle with me, that I need to consider. To properly bring everything into perspective. He slowly sat up, watching something materialize before him. It seemed like tangled up darkness, with an entity walking out of the dark breach that stained the room. Just the person I wanted to see. Ader. The red-haired beast fully emerged from the darkness, causing it to crumble right behind him. He had his sly smile on, and both hands were in his pockets. Master. The moment he saw Ray, though, he bowed his head and ceased his casual demeanor. With his hands away from his pockets, one was lightly placed on his chest, while the other on his back. His deep, respectful bow would have touched Ray immensely if he wasn't already suspicious of Ader. Still, he appreciated the gesture with a smile. Looks like you're done taking care of matters with the Reaper group. Indeed, Master. Proper production will begin tomorrow. You can go to the site to observe for yourself. I think I will. Thank you. It is my pleasure, Master. After Ader said this, there was a bit of awkward silence between the two. It felt uncomfortable, but before Ray could think of something to fill in the wide gap between them, his familiar took the initiative. About your trip to the Empire. I'm a little concerned. How do you plan to disguise yourself? You haven't fully revealed the details of that to me. Normally, Ray would have simply folded and showed Ader all his cards, but he had to be careful here, so he took some time to think very seriously about his decision. Once he made up his mind, he finally spoke up. One of the skills I got from Adrian is called. It'll allow me to change my appearance into whatever I want. Ray schemed over the details, such as how his promoted the skill from its base A tier state to S tier, and how the skill could potentially serve as an illusory skill meant to deceive all whom it targeted. Using it as a disguise was just one of the many he could utilize it. Are you confident that your true identity won't be detected by anyone? Ader went on to ask. Yeah. As long as the person doesn't have a higher class than I do, it's impossible. And even if they have the same stats as I do, they would have to get past my skill, that allows me to imbue divine attribute to any one skill. I see. So the currently possesses divine status. Yup. Impressive, Master. You've really thought this through. Indeed. Once again, there was a brief silence between the two of them. Then. May I see the form you plan to take once you are in the Dragon Empire? Oh? Why? Just out of curiosity, Master. I have also studied quite a few of them, so there could be hidden details in your design that could give you away. One has to be meticulous in these things, after all. I see. I see. Ray couldn't argue against his logic there. Ader knew his stuff, and he wouldn't be foolish enough to refuse his help, especially since he already knew about how insightful Ader could be. Might as well show him. Ray decided, after expanding his senses to detect any form of trick. There was no trick. It was simply Ader standing there, smiling and waiting. Here. Ray rose to his feet and activated his skill on the spot. Instantly, his appearance and his overall aura changed. Pshua. He possessed bright blue hair, with a single horn protruding from his forehead. His eyes glowed brightly, and his small wings and tail flapped and danced as he revealed this form to Ader. Here. What do you think? He smiled, folding his arms as he smirked confidently at the familiar before him. This. Ader narrowed his eyes, placing his hand on his chin as his lips curled downwards to form a grim frown. This is all wrong. Chapter 764 Meeting with Ader. What do you mean all wrong? For a moment, Ader remained quiet after Ray's question. Instead, he took time to observe the boy's appearance once more, his gaze scrutinizing even the littlest detail. It even almost felt like he was undressing him with his eyes. Your appearance. It feels odd, almost like you are cosplaying as a dragon, if you know what I mean. Wait. Ray knew this wasn't an important thing to bring up at the moment, but he just had to satisfy his curiosity. How do you know about cosplaying? Belle told me about it. Oh. It all made perfect sense once he knew who the knowledge came from. I guess the two of them really talk a lot, huh? In any case, it doesn't feel very authentic. I believe it also does very little to hide your human-like features, and doesn't blend the two together. For example, you need slightly bigger eyes and more defined jaws. Your ears should also. By the time Ader was done with explanations, Ray realized just how off he was when it came to disguising as a dragon. It wasn't that he didn't know what a dragon looked like, but it was simply that he didn't know how to incorporate it into his own custom appearance. The only thing he really got right was the number of horns. Even the age of his disguise was slightly off, but that was only because Ray had only encountered adult dragons. In conclusion, he needed to rework his design from scratch, and that was exactly what he did. Under Ader's supervision, he was finally able to get the design right. Thanks. I finally figured it out. Ray sighed, collapsing on his bed for a moment, mostly due to mental exhaustion. He wasn't tired in the true sense of the word, but he definitely felt like he was. This is nothing, Master. You can always rely on me. Ader bowed his head after saying this, and the sincere manner by which he said this caused Ray to feel a slight pang of guilt within him. It genuinely seemed like Ader was doing his best for the sake of his master, yet Ray was viewing everything through the lens of suspicion. At that point, Ray had two options: remain the way he was, or address the ever-growing gap of trust between the two of them. He chose the former. Thank you. I will also ensure to do my best in the South. As promised, I will resort to as little violence as possible, and also ensure they become our cooperative allies no matter what. Of course, I won't force them to do it. Yeah. I look forward to that. Ray didn't think he expressed it with his words, but he was really surprised and impressed by how much Ader had changed over the course of him being around. He remembered how very open and assertive he used to be regarding his dark inclinations, but he had slowly gained more tact and understanding as time went on. In fact, he rarely ever brought up suggestions or plans unless asked, and his evil alignment hardly showed in his strategy. All of these changes were due to the conditions that Ray had set previously. He's studied my preferences and chosen to act in accordance with them. He smiled, clearly satisfied with the progress that the familiar showed. This made it all the more difficult to view Ader in a negative light. Master, I should remind you that you still owe me a reward for my most recent accomplishment of protecting the capital and resolving the pre-existing issues. Once Ray heard this, he gave a slight gasp. Ah, yes. He hadn't thought of a reward, and after becoming occupied with their other plans, it skipped his mind. Considering the gravity of what Ader did, Ray reckoned he needed something very rewarding. It's only because of him I was able to get this strong as well. The plan he concocted with Emil was suspicious, but also very helpful. Ray could not deny Ader's assistance, even though he no longer trusted him. I'll just ask him what he wants. And so he did. Ader fell into deep contemplation upon being asked to mention what he wanted most as his reward. Well, if I was to choose. It was at that moment that Ray remembered what Ader chose as his reward the last time, being petted as a cat. It would be even weirder now. Please don't choose that. He cried inside, looking at Ader with pleading eyes while the unaware familiar seemingly wrestled with his thoughts about what he considered a fitting reward. I would have chosen to receive some praise from you, but I believe there is one thing I desire most from you. Oh, you? I mean, what is it that you desire most? Ray smiled, relieved it wasn't what he feared, but also fearing what was about to come. Silence. Ader merely looked at Ray for a moment without saying anything, as if studying his countenance. He then approached the boy with a few steps before stopping just a few inches from his master's feet. "You no longer trust me, master." Those words hit Ray like a sledgehammer, causing yet another pang to swell from within him. Ader's smile completely vanished, now replaced by a contemplative expression that drew even more sympathy and guilt from Ray. He wanted to believe that Ader was merely trying to manipulate the situation, but everything about him oozed genuineness. It began to seem as though Ray was the one being paranoid. "I have observed your actions prior to your return from the land of the elves, and especially after. After watching you and thinking for quite a while, I have come to the conclusion that you have doubts about me." Ray could not deny those allegations, because they were true. Now that Ader said them out loud, it made the whole matter quite serious, and the fact that the usually smiling figure in the room was completely serious gave off a grim feeling in the air. "Master, I want you to trust me. That is my desire." As soon as Ader uttered those words, he fell to his knees and made a subservient bow that chilled Ray to his very core. "Ader, I recognize that it might be very demanding to ask of you, but I intend to make things easier for you to make your decision." Ader raised his head and lifted his hand, causing a black box to appear almost instantly. Ray instantly recognized it as the cursed box that belonged to the United Human Alliance. "The Dybbuk, Master. This allows multiple parties to enter a pact that can be enforced with a curse from this world. As you are well aware, I have no means to alter a curse, or I would have done something to help Alicia. Since that is the case, it appears this item is most optimal in restoring the trust you have in me." "What exactly are you driving at, Ader?" Ray blurted out. "Let us enter a pact, Master. I will accept all of your conditions, including to be absolutely submissive to your words and to never betray you." A lot of thoughts went on in all the layers of Ray's mind, but they could all be summarized into one thing. "For real? Master, I'm surprised you didn't place him under a pact, but you placed me under one. Do you trust him more than you trust me?" Emil's thoughts were also loud in his thoughts, so he had to address that too. "Haha. Not exactly. We are sort of already connected by a bond, so there was no need for any kind of pact. At least, back then." Since Ray had no way to formally enforce their bond, it made it functionally useless. He also didn't have any taming skills, so he couldn't confidently call Ader a familiar in a very strict sense. Despite all of this, he remained very loyal to Loyal. "Are you sure about this?" Ray asked, an eyebrow raised as he stared at the disturbing energy that the audiobook released from all around it. Ader nodded his head, silence still remaining as his lips were tightly shut. He simply stared in determination. "You. Fine, then," Ray finally said. "Who am I to refuse your heartfelt request? I thank you, Master." And so, just as with Emil, they set up standards for the pact rules and punishment that would be followed by both sides. The restriction placed on Ader were three. One was to never act in any way that would jeopardize the interests of Ray or any of his allies. The second was to obey any of Ray's commands, and to inform Ray of any action he would take that would affect those commands in any way. The third and final one was to protect Ray and his allies if the case demanded for it. To all of this, Ader nodded and readily accepted the conditions, as well as the only punishment for disobedience: instant death. Chapter 765 Meeting with Ader. Why? As Ray stared at Ader, the pact already formed, and the box now in his possession, he felt puzzled by a gnawing feeling that he had no control over. Why does something still feel off? The audiobook was supposed to give Ray the avenue to trust Ader wholeheartedly, but the assurance faded almost instantly, and Ray didn't know why. Was it because the curse from the item had failed before with Emil? Or could it be possible that Ader had a duplicate, or even a completely different item, that could break him from the shackles of his curse? Ader was smart and resourceful enough to orchestrate something behind the scenes while making it appear as though he was perfectly docile. Ray wasn't unaware of that fact, so it bothered him to no end. What if this subservience thing is just an act? Could he really be blamed for suspecting the master manipulator known as Ader? It appears you are still unconvinced. The familiar in question spoke, breaking Ray out of his myriad of thoughts. Sorry, Ader. No, I perfectly understand. I would probably be the same in your situation, though I suppose I'd be more skilled at hiding my suspicions. You know you're not helping your case, right? Ader chuckled as he heard this. I know. I'm just being honest, though. Ray truly wanted to trust Ader, especially after seeing the way he was genuine with him about his disposition. There was a chance that it was all a lie, but it wasn't like Ader was ever going to stop being Ray's familiar either way. He could have ignored my distrust and kept doing things behind the scenes, but he instead confronted me. Doesn't that mean he's genuine? Or maybe that's what he wants me to think. In the end, Ray could not decide on what he could particularly believe and not believe about Ader, at least, not without some help. I think I'll have to resort to skills. He sighed. Skills? Yeah. My skills. If I place you under a few of them, then I think that would be able to put my mind at rest. Ray finally confessed. He already had a few he had been wanting to try, and Ader was the perfect candidate for it. All right, Master. I am ready whenever you are. It still felt awkward having Ader kneel before him while he sat upright on the bed. Their positions felt a little awkward, but he didn't let that distract him. Instead, after placing the audiobook in his new inventory, he opened his skill window and looked at the list of skills in his arsenal. Doppel. Merger. Perfect Calm. Sacrifice. Symbiosis. Consume. Perfect Mimicry. Domain of Man. Clairvoyance. Divine Weapon Creation. Perfect Divine Magic. Divine Power Ascension. Perfect Divine Ray. Divine Magic Supremacy. Perfect Domain of the Divine. Perfect Divine Defense. Perfect Divine Regeneration. Perfect Divine Appraisal. Perfect Divine Martial Supremacy. Perfect Divine Growth. Perfect Divine Form. Perfect Divine Adaptability. Unbreakable. Divine Magic Interference. Tempera. Divine Persona. Perfect Wish Fulfillment. It is written. Audiobook, Cursed Pact. Absolute Myriad Breath. Absolute Energy Pulse. Absolute Mass Stun. Absolute Mana Recovery. Absolute Intuition. Absolute Cry. Absolute Comprehension. Perfect Reflection. Absolute Illusory Allure. Absolute Executioner. Perfect Decorum. Perfect Collapse. Symbiosis. Consume. Perfect Mimicry. Equip Limit Break. Deep Anticipation. Command Code. Pinocchio. Status Interference. Idle Gamble. Perfect Veil. Last One Standing. Fertility Inducement. Miasma Aura. Nature affinity. Venom. Perfect float. Inventory. Mind touch. Link. Where evil lurks. Banishment. Full comprehension. Collapse. Grand darkness. Grand luck. For the purposes of controlling Ader and easing my worries, the ones I'll be using are and could be used to give a person a particular set of instructions, and they would have no choice but to obey at any given time. It could be pre-registered on any particular person, or made up on the spot. In a way, it was a much more advanced and calculated form of mind control. In a way that made it incredibly scary. One could be under mind control and never even know it until the command is given and they have to obey without realizing it. It was also possible to control the body while leaving the mind intact. Using on Ader will allow me to enforce obedience, even if the curses from the audiobook are gotten rid of. The skill was previously A tier, but bumped it to S tier. I can also use to raise it even higher anytime I want to use a pre-registered command. Doing that would mean undoing his disguise made from, but it would be worth it. Besides, he wasn't only going to rely on theirs. Using, I can create advanced spells that allow Ader to be bound to me, connected in every way, so I know his every location and what he is up to. This will allow me to keep track of him, but also control him through magic. All in all, with these options that came from the function of his skills, he was covered. I might not be able to use on him, for some reason, but other skills work on Ader. I've used quite a few in the past. Do you accept all of the limitations I am about to place on you, Ader? Ray asked, revealing the cards he was about to deal him. It seemed strange that one would voluntarily desire to be controlled, but Ader was completely fine with it. As long as he could regain Ray's complete trust. I accept them all. Chapter 766, Meeting with Ader. All complete. Ray was done with all the restrictions and commands that he could think of in no time, and Ader accepted them all in full stride. There were no complaints about any of the commands or restraints that he was placed under. Even Ray felt like he was being unfair at a point, but Ader didn't raise any objection. It's strange, though. Ray's thoughts trailed. Why would the system warn Ray about Ader, and why would the Oracle do the same, when his skills could perfectly keep Ader at bay and the familiar in question was perfectly subservient? Is it because he's dangerous to everyone else, except his master? I wonder. But if that was the case, then why wasn't working on him? At this point, that was the last strand that his doubts were clinging to. If that could be answered satisfactorily, he would be able to dismiss the genuine concerns of the Oracle, as well as his own. And who better to ask about this than Ader himself? Ray had contemplated this for a while, ever since he realized that Ader was exempt from, but it was only until now that HT felt he could make the informed decision to present the issue. Why can't I use on you? Pardon? I can't use on you, despite it being an SSS tier skill. Does that even make any sense? You should have an explanation for that, right? Ader sighed the moment the question was presented to him, almost as if he couldn't believe he was being asked something like that. It almost made Ray feel stupid for asking the question. Is a skill that grants the user sight and knowledge of the past, present, and future of everything and everyone within its domain. For your skill, it seems you can detect everyone and everything in H-tray, including their past, present, future. Of course, memory has to be put into account. Ray never told Ader any of these, so he wondered where he got it from. In case you're wondering where I got this knowledge from, it's from one of my previous worlds. I encountered someone with such an ability. Hold on. It isn't just restricted to Tray. Ray's eyes slightly widened as he said this, genuinely surprised by the revelation. What do you think primeval skills are, Master? They cut across the many worlds that exist. For a world to properly function, they require these skills as building blocks. In essence, they are essential to any world under the system. Oh. Ray's eyes returned to normal as he processed the information. Indeed. Your skill is an exception, though. I don't think it's supposed to be wielded as an SSS tier skill the way you use it. But, I'm not sure. Well, Seraph did seem a little concerned about me getting the skill. I thought it was her being discriminatory, but the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. This skill is too OP. He smiled, once again feeling incredibly grateful that he got his hands on the skill. If someone like Adonis or Alicia had gotten before him, he would have been cooked. No. If I didn't speak back then about karma, my turn would have been shifted to the furthest end of the list. I would have definitely missed out on a host of skills. Why did he speak up, though? It wasn't in his nature to just say something in a crowd of people, especially when such an authority figure like Seraph was overwhelming the crowd with her presence. Ray remembered why. It's because of you, Adonis. During the field trip. No. Several times before then, you consistently tried to make me more assertive. It wasn't like they were close or anything, and Ray often watched Adonis from afar, but the latter often talked to him and offered words of encouragement. Of course, Ray knew he wasn't special, as Ader did this with practically everyone. Still, his words during the field trip really resonated with him. You're more exceptional than you think, Ray. Perhaps those words were what prompted him to speak up during Seraph's explanation, especially after seeing Adonis and Alicia stand up to the rest of the class. That mere stroke of luck, that decisive moment, was due to the few words that Adonis told him in passing. In a way, I suppose I owe all of this to you, Adonis. Ray smiled, once again wondering where the hero was during this period. It was possible to use to find him, but that would mean Ray would have to search the entire world, which would take an absurd amount of memory space. He couldn't afford that. At least, not at the current moment. The alliance is currently stable, so Adonis isn't necessarily needed. I'm worried about him, but right now I have to look at the bigger picture. Yes. The bigger picture. Ader, do you know the other SSS tier skills? Tell me about all of them. As soon as Ader leaked out that sound, slowly itching his crimson hair, Ray already knew where the conversation was headed. I can't remember. I'm sorry, but my memory is still. Ray narrowed his eyes suspiciously at Ader, who leaked out a bead of sweat and sighed with exasperation. Ray knew Ader was telling the truth, but wasn't this too convenient? How does he know about, but not the other skills? I don't get it. He screamed internally, almost out of frustration. Still, he kept his cool externally. Forget it. Just answer my question regarding the reason why you don't seem to be affected by. Oh, yes. That. Ader rubbed his chin, as if looking for the best way to explain away his current predicament. Maybe it's because I'm a beast summoned from another world. No, I can use on Emil, so that can't be the right answer. Ray responded almost immediately. After all, he had thought of that too. If Ader really can't give me a satisfactory answer, then I don't think I can trust him. Chapter 767, Meeting with Ader. Emil is a different case, though. Ader's response to Ray caused him to raise an eyebrow, but he still waited for an elaboration to be made on the matter. Emil is a symbiote, and so she takes on a lot of your qualities as you take on hers. In essence, it's not like she's a distinct entity as I am. She's a part of you and you're a part of her. AHH. How envious I am of her. Ray shivered slightly, definitely creeped out by Ader's words at the end. The smile he rendered as he remained on his knees and looked up at Ray made the whole thing seem even weirder. He. It's a good thing he knows his place. Emil's laughter of victory nearly deafened Ray's inner thoughts, almost drowning his worries. However, that couldn't completely silence the concerns that still littered his mind. Even if that is true, your argument for being from another world doesn't work. Why do you say so? I'm an otherworlder, and so are my classmates. Yet, not only could the oracle use on me, but I can also use it on any of my classmates. In essence, Ader's excuse was refuted by its own logic. If otherworlders were still subject to the skill, then how was Ader any different? What made him distinct from other otherworlders? I should be considered a special case, though. After all, you otherworlders were called by the world through a means that isn't strictly within the bounds of the system, while I was brought in here by a skill under the system. Ray could see that Ader was telling the truth, but he didn't understand how he could draw such an inference and make such a conclusion. It all seemed quite absurd. The interdimensional summon was done through ancient Magi, or at least some version of it. You spoke about seeing Seraph, an angel, right? That means your travel was fully sanctioned by the world, and so your arrival here was completely registered by the world. I still don't. Think of yourself as someone who got a permanent residency or citizenship in H-Tray, and me as something of an illegal immigrant. You. Yeah, I learned that from Belle as well. I see. Since you were called by the world, you received benefits from the system, one of which was the ability to be subject to. That way, you are recognized as official denizens of H-Tray that can be used by the world to push its agenda. In essence, you help the world and the world helps you. Just as a permanent resident or citizen's case would be. But shouldn't you be the same? If you were summoned by a skill, that means the system was involved. Right? You would think so, right? But no. Beast summons aren't particularly accepted by the world. They are the tools of their summoners, and so the one who summons them is responsible for their well-being and upkeep. The way Ray understood it, getting into H-Tray the proper way was what gave he and his classmates the privileges they got. Including H-Tray's welfare system that came about by the system. Beast summons like Ader, on the other hand, were not given this welfare system. At least, not completely. My stats were reset upon arriving here. I lost some skills that were incompatible with this world's set of skills, and my class remains that of a beast. So, I am recognized by this world as a foreigner. Of course, leveling up remains something I can do, since EXP is something that has been common in all the worlds I've been to. But it's much more difficult for beast familiars to level up, especially an entity like myself. The more Ray listened, the more he understood Ader's situation. It sort of made sense in its own way, and Ray could hardly find any hole in his detailed explanation. Perhaps this was because Ray didn't know much about the system and worlds that Ader spoke so confidently about. To begin with, is meant to keep track of the world's assets and to lay the groundwork for its future. It measures all the constants and variables, calculating everything accordingly in order to arrive at its desired conclusion. You mean the destruction of every other race apart from the elves? Is that what the oracle told you? Why yet? This was the first time Ray was telling this to anyone. It felt a little nice to get this matter off his chest, but saying the grim future only made him more frightened about the possibility of its fruition. I see. Then, I suppose that is this world's objective. Objective? Yes. Every world has one, and it makes sure the action of everything and everyone in that world functions in accordance to that directive. You mean? Yes. This world will be destroyed, one way or the other. The elves will be the only survivors, and its objective will be achieved. But why? Why would the world desire such an end? I don't know. All goes in accordance to nature, I suppose. Ader shrugged, clearly unbothered by the potential elimination of millions, if not billions of lives. He didn't care in the slightest. Let me guess. You've experienced the destruction of a world before. Upon hearing this, Ader made a dark chuckle. His eyes glowed bright crimson as he looked at Ray with an amused grin. I have destroyed worlds. A slight shiver instantly rushed through Ray's body as he heard this, forcing a period of silence between the two parties. But I'm completely unrelated to the fate that will befall this world. Unfortunately, I won't be having the pleasure of wreaking havoc here. Ader, you. Don't worry, Master. I'm on your side. What does that mean? You want to save the world, right? You want to prevent the predetermined path that this world should undertake, right? Yeah. Ray responded a little slowly as he watched Ader with slightly unsure eyes. This response only caused Ader's grin to widen in satisfaction. That is also what I desire. Chapter 768 Behind the Scenes. Ader had proven his case, and he didn't seem to be lying to Ray about anything. If he was, one of the curses would have activated, and Ader would be dead on the ground. Besides, Ray could tell if his familiar was lying due to their bond. He's telling the truth about everything. The details were still lost to Ray, but there was no doubt about it, Ader was on his side. If you still have your doubts, there is a way to prove the validity of my claim. Ader spoke up, forcing Ray to look in his eyes as he made a confident proposal. What's that? Alicia White. Have her summon a beast familiar so you can use on it. That way, you'll be able to. No. Ray's response was flat and final. He had a serious expression on his face, though none of it indicated anger of any kind. May I ask why? Ader's sincere voice wafted through the air, causing Ray to sigh and lean backwards a little, his gaze on the familiar, but his thoughts far away. Alicia still hasn't gotten over her trauma. It would be selfish of me to make her summon a beast familiar just to satiate my curiosity. He mumbled. Besides, I can already see that you're telling the truth, so there really is no need for that. For a second or two, there was silence. Ader then gave a silent chuckle and bowed his head in respect and satisfaction. Understood, Master. Thank you for trusting me. Ray smiled. Yeah. I guess I fully believe you now. This wasn't just for show either. Ray found no reason to doubt Ader, and was now instead questioning the validity of the Oracle's warnings. Both Emil and Ader had only profited him in one way or the other, and while he was yet to see the full picture, he determined that it was best to simply trust in his own camp. I trust you'll complete your task flawlessly, as you always do. And I trust that you will achieve your objective in the Dragon Academy, Master. Ader beamed back. Both parties understood each other perfectly, and so there was not much more to be said. You may rise, Ader. You may rise, Frey. Ader's voice echoed in the massive hall that was the White Dragon Lord's office. He was seated very comfortably behind a desk, a place she usually occupied while she was on her knees, paying homage to his magnificent presence. The moment she heard his instruction, she rose from her subservient position and offered him her warmest smile. The figures behind her also followed suit. 2 students will be visiting your academy next week. The details will be submitted to you prior to that moment, but I want you to make sufficient preparations to ensure that their transition goes smoothly. Understood. Without asking any questions, she responded. Other than their admission and entry into the academy, also ensure that you look out for them. Make sure they're settled in perfectly, and that they do not enter into any kind of trouble. In essence, their stay in the academy should be without incident. Pardon my question, but what if they cause an incident? Ader smiled broadly, his eyes shining bright crimson as he narrowed his lids. Then let them take care of it. Oh really? Indeed. I doubt an incident would occur without any thought placed in it. Besides, you'll be reporting to me about their life in the academy, so I suppose if there are any changes to my initial instructions, I can let you know. Understood. The remnant tension in the atmosphere slowly began to dissipate as Ader rose to his feet and left the chair, only to rest his behind on the desk while maintaining close proximity to the White Dragon Lord. From any distance, one could see how gorgeous she was, but an appreciation of her beauty only amplified the closer one got to her. Ader could see it all. Her flawless white hair only matched her pale skin and pure white gown. Her voluptuous chest nearly spilled out of her outfit, with cleavage that would make any man run mad. Her face was flawlessly beautiful, and the nervousness she displayed in his presence made her appear even more attractive. Anyone who laid eyes on her body would desire her, but Ader was different. His eyes were disconcerted, and the excitement he displayed was directed at none other than the incoming incident, rather than the Dragon Lord before him. In a way, that made the dynamic opposite. Ader did not desire her. She desired him. You've been a good girl so far, and as a result, I am willing to return your wards to you. Ader gently placed his hand on her chin and lifted her head so she could stare him in the eyes. His crimson eyes drowned her face in its glowing radiance, reflecting the passionate gaze she used to look at him. Oh really? Yes. Shayat and Katarin. He muttered, his eyes slowly drifting away from Freyja to 2 of the 5 figures who stood behind the White Dragon Lord. Yes, Sir Ader. They both stepped forward, appearing no different than the dragon generals that they had been. Flawless skin. Regal attires. Perfect forms. They were the real deal. You will now return to serving your lord, as I promised. Your loyalty to her must never waver, and your devotion to her cause must remain. Is that understood? Yes, Sir Ader. He returned his gaze to Freyja, whose body was now slowly trembling as she kept her eyes on his own face. His corrupted darkness heavily contrasted the purity that she represented. It was alluring. Thank you, Ader. Yes. That's it? He drew his face closer to hers, causing her trembling to increase, and her face to become much hotter than usual. Freyja's breathing became uneven as she remained still in his presence, and steamy clouds flowed from her lustrous lips and nostrils. All of this only caused Ader to smile even more. Your eyes. They're wonderful. Gently stroking her face, he whispered those words passionately. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still, but he broke the silence easily. How are you enjoying your new eye? Chapter 769 Behind the Scenes. Freyja, the White Dragon Lord, was an epitome of beauty. Among the Dragon Lords, there was none who rivaled her in beauty and sheer prestige, at least, that was what she liked to think. Of all her features, there was one that she was most proud of, though. Her eyes. They were beautiful, like the depths of a crystal sea, or a boundless sky. The immaculate mix of blue, with white sparkles, made them glorious to look at. They weren't only for decoration as well. Her skills involved her eyes a good deal, so they were her greatest assets in every sense of the word. Until the great old dragon lord plucked one out. Freyja had sunk into despair after that. She thought her beauty had been forever tainted, and that she would forever be denied the full power that used to be hers. Her ambition would be forced into a standstill, and she would lose all the respect of her peers. Even though she was grateful for being spared, her life was never going to be the same. Then Ader came along. He changed everything upon his arrival, starting with her new eyes. That single act was more than enough to make her enamored by him. "How are you enjoying your new eye?" The moment he asked this question, the pink hues on the cheeks of the white dragon lord intensified, almost turning bright red. "He's close." Not only did he get closer to her, his chest nearly rubbing against hers, but she could feel his chill drawing close to her steaming body. She did her best to be composed, but Ader wasn't making it easy. It's amazing. I can see much better than before, and my abilities are also much stronger. Then, there's also that new skill that I have." She honestly spewed these words, despite being tensed. Her syrupy smile made it clear how giddy and clumsy she was being. Still, she didn't stop. "From the bottom of my heart, I thank you." She would have bowed her head, but Ader was too close to her, so she couldn't. In an attempt to give him her utmost respect, Freyja tried to take a step back and properly show reverence, but Ader wrapped an arm behind her and drew her closer to him. "Eep." Her face instantly turned beet red. She could feel the rate at which her heart was beating, and it was dangerous. She was trembling again, feeling all sorts of emotions, and yet couldn't remove her gaze from the predator that had caught her in his webs. Her chest pressed on his, and she felt an electric sensation flow through her body. Rough. Too rough. No man had ever been this way with her. Freyja had always been a goddess since she was born, so most dragons sucked up to her. She was talented in everything she did, and her physical qualities matched her overwhelming combat abilities. Ultimately, there were only very few who could be considered her equal or superior. But none of them had any interest in women. None of them looked at her, or touched her, or spoke to her, the way Ader currently did. The White Dragon Lord felt bliss at that moment. "Surely, you have some form of dissatisfaction. Tell me." Once again, Ader could see right through her. She couldn't fight the almighty effects that his words had on her. In the end, she gave in. "Sometimes, I just think it's a shame that I can't show off my newfound strength to the other lords. Maybe if I show them how great you are, you could even have more allies among our ranks." Ader smiled, pulling his face close enough that his lips grazed hers. "Oh." Her knees went weak, and her legs nearly gave out. She remained firm, though. "That is unnecessary. I do not require anyone else but you, Freyja." The way he spoke, especially how he said her name, made her heart leap many bounds. Freyja loved it. Besides, isn't it good that only you have access to this power? You'll be able to serve the Emperor well, surpassing those who were once your equals. Yes. You're right. Serving the Emperor was ultimately the goal of every dragon, and Freyja was no exception to that. She told herself that the only reason she was allied with Ader was because he would aid in her efforts to do so. Yes. That was the only reason. "I am grateful for your overwhelming assistance." She smiled warmly, though a hint of sadness still flickered in her eyes. For a moment, silence existed between the two. Then, without any notice or warning, Freyja felt herself sink into the entirety of Ader's body. He had embraced her, branding himself on her entire body, as she became tainted with his unending darkness. Strangely, it brought her comfort. "What troubles you? Talk to me, Freyja," he whispered to her ears. I guess I'm just worried about a lot of things right now. There's a lot on my plate." "Like what?" Well, for one, I'm concerned about the performance of my girls in the coming exhibition." The squads and lords undertook an exhibition before the emperor every year, and she could feel the growing pressure as the days drew nearer. Even though she had grown considerably stronger than before, she couldn't say the same about her two subordinates who made up a squad. "Then there's the fact that I am very much behind on a lot of academic decisions due to the time I had to take to acclimate to the eye. There are so many things I need to do, like finding a place for the field trip of the students, as well as preparation for the upcoming events." The only reason the great old dragon lord spared her was due to her importance in the academy. She couldn't screw that up now. "Don't worry about all of that," Ader said with a smile, pulling away from their embrace so she could see his confident face. "Ader, I know the best way to resolve the weakness of your squad, and while I know you are more than capable enough to handle the academy events, I have a mild suggestion regarding the upcoming excursion." The glint of mischief in his eyes told Freyja that he had many interesting things in his mind. She wanted to know so badly. "Tell me."